Great Tribal Chief. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 76. An Englishman on a firm footing. But the tragic English immigrants met a very good Indian tribe leader. The leader's name is Powhatan. He is the chief of the Powhatan Alliance. After the Powhatans were expelled from Monongahela by the Cherokees, they came to the eastern coastal area to form the Powhatan Alliance to fight against the increasingly powerful Cherokees. At this time, the first group of English immigrants from across the ocean came to the territory controlled by the Powhatan League. Although it was not long after the establishment in Jamestown, because of communication problems, the first batch of English immigrants and the Powhatan Alliance fought a battle. The history is called the First British Powhatan Battle, but that battle speaks of it. It's almost like a child's playhouse. The English immigrants were beaten up by the powerful Powhatans, and many people died. In the end, they relied on the cannon built in Jamestown to frighten the Powhatans. The two sides negotiated a peace. It may be that Chief Powhatan felt a little sorry for these poor vasages. So Chief Powhatan began to take care of the colonists who were small in number, and relatively poor, and who could continue to produce good things. So before the death of Chief Powhatan in 1618, the English immigrants living in Jamestown were relatively happy. But when Chief Powhatan died and his brother Opechancanough took the power of the Powhatan Alliance, this policy was changed. When Chief Powhatan was in power, Opechancanough was the first warrior of the Powhatan Alliance. He had his own village, but he always opposed cooperating with the colonists. In fact, for the first time the British Powhatan, the Battle of Tan, was led by this guy. After the death of Chief Powhatan, Opechancanough did not become the chief, but one of his brothers came to the throne. This was the successor chosen by Chief Powhatan, but his brother only occupied the name of the chief. The true power of the alliance fell into the hands of Opechancanough. In the 12 years after the establishment of Jamestown by the English colonists until the death of Chief Powhatan, because of the Powhatan Alliance's gentle policy towards the colonists, there were more and more colonists. Even in the 2 or 3 years after the death of Chief Powhatan, Opechancanough, who controlled the power of the Powhatan Alliance, had been in peace with the English colonists. And even another war broke out between the Powhatan Alliance and the Cherokee. At that time, Opechancanough also asked the English colonists to send people to help. At that time, Opechancanough's request was approved by the colonial parliament, but it is a pity that the British colonists did not send people to the war in the end, which made Opechancanough very upset. Especially at that time, Virginia tobacco was extremely popular in Europe, which caused the colonists of Ingalls to start growing tobacco in Virginia. However, tobacco is a crop that consumes a lot of soil power. At that time, there was no chemical fertilizer. The breeding industry in the Virginia colony was underdeveloped, and there was not enough animal manure to make fertilizer. Therefore, the land where tobacco was grown became barren and unusable after a few years of planting. Now, new land can only be reclaimed. But the colonists occupied such a large area. In order to open up new land, the colonists continued to move to the interior, making Opechancanough even more intolerable. The fuse that eventually led to Opechancanoug's final decision to attack the English immigrants in Jamestown again came from one of his right-hand men. Opechancanoug's assistant is named Namataneu, and he has been acting as a messenger between Opechancanough and the colonists. One day in the spring of 1622, Namataneu came to the house of a colonist named Morgan. He saw some good things. He suggested to Morgan to go to the royal court of the Union. If he could sell it for a good price. Morgan followed him, went, but never came back. A few days later Namataneu came to the colony again and told the colonist that Mr. Morgan was dead. Everyone saw that this guy was wearing Morgan's hat and felt that he was very suspicious. So they had to take him to the judge for a trial, but Namataneu was still alive, and someone shot him during the dispute. Before he died, Namataneu asked to bury him secretly here, lest Opechancanough knew about it and caused trouble. But these colonists are not good people, and they didn't care about killing an Indian. In the end, the fact that Namataneu was killed by the colonists was still known by Opakunakineu. The angry Opakunakineu made a plan to slay the colonists in the spring of 1622. Along the James River, they would kill the colonists when they saw it. Once the plan is drawn up, people will notify the tribes and prepare to act in unison at the appointed time. But the news leaked, and the English colonists were prepared. But even with preparations, there are colonies everywhere along the James River, and the colonists are scattered, and it is difficult to notify them all at once. On March 22, 1622, the Poynton Alliance launched a surprise attack on the various colonies. Jamestown was not breached due to guards, but other small colonies could not be prevented. The Indians rushed in and killed people. At the end of the day, more than 400 colonists were killed, accounting for 1/3 of the colony's population in Virginia. The sudden attack on this day caused a serious injury to the Virginia colony, because the majority of the dead were adult men. Among the remaining people, women and children, the elderly and the weak accounted for 2/3. For a while, many people were in panic, planning to escape back to the UK. However, what the English informants did not expect was that after the Poynton Alliance attacked for a day, Opakunakineu did not continue the attack, but returned to his home. It turns out that Opakunakineu made the judgment according to the custom of wars between Indians. In the past, when the Indian tribes fought to such a degree, the losing party can only afford to hide. We'll move to another place. Opakunakineu thinks that the British will do the same, and will be on the ship and leave within 2 months. It is true that some colonists plan to withdraw to Europe, but more people want to stick to it. They first concentrated the scattered colonists in several large colonies for defense. The second is to organize militias to avenge the massacre. However, the colony was not manpowered enough. Only 1/3 of the existing people were men who were able to fight, so they resorted to guerrilla warfare to find opportunities to retaliate against the Indians, including destroying their crops and fishing nets. This guerrilla tactic was very successful, and the harassing Opakunakineu had a headache, so he had to ask for peace talks. Through other Indian tribes, the two sides reached a peaceful intention, and Opakunakineu relaxed his vigilance and believed that from now on, the world was peaceful. Now, bring people to sign a peace agreement with the colonists. What Opakunakineu did not expect was that the signing of the peace agreement this time turned out to be a banquet. At the ceremony celebrating the signing of the peace agreement, the colonists brought out their wine. The Indians who knew this thing drank happily, and soon disappeared. It turned out that the colonists poisoned the wine. At this time, the colonists initiated in the sudden attack. More than 200 Indians were poisoned and more than 50 people were killed. www.wuxiaspa.com. But Opakunakineu did not drink and escaped in chaos. The colonists then wiped out the Indian settlements, and the Powhatans would naturally fight back. The Poyntons had an advantage in numbers, but the English immigrants had muskets, so the war lasted until 1628, known as the Second British Poynton Battle in history. At this time, Opakunakineu understood that the British would not be able to drive away, so he had to admit the reality. So the British colonists continued to migrate inland to Virginia, constantly occupying the active territory of the Indians. By 1642, even Opakunakineu became a landlord. He leased a piece of land to the colonists. The rent was 50 baskets of corn every year. In this way, the English immigrants firmly established themselves in Virginia and began to extend their tentacles to the Appalachian Mountains further west, until they met the Cherokees living in the Appalachian Mountains. However, although the English colonists at this time had just fought with the Poyntons and suffered serious losses, the English immigrants at this time were still afraid to offend the more powerful Cherokees. The most important thing is that because the English colonists and the Poyntons are enemies, based on the principle that the enemy's enemy is a friend, the powerful Cherokee and the English colonists have become close friends. The English colonists learned from the Cherokee that their most noble Cabra sacrificial line lived at the foot of the Great Smoky Mountains, so they found it here. This is why the Gaoshu tribe has 3 or 4 groups of English colonists coming to trade every year. P.S. Although these 2 chapters are about the English colonists and the Point in Alliance, they are related to the follow-up content, so please don't tell me that Lao Mo's writing is crooked. Chapter 77, Red Shrimp Soldier. Of course, the reason that attracted the English colonists to risk the long journey to the Gaoshu tribe was not just that the Gaoshu tribe was the Cabra sacrificial line. The main reason was that it had the best fur within 100 miles. The High Tree tribe includes the small tribes separated from the High Tree tribe. Most of them live near the Big Bend. A large number of beavers live in the Tennessee River. These skins, which are extremely precious in Europe, became the target of the English colonists. Of course, the gold and various gems rich in the Gaoshu tribe were also what these English colonists most hoped for. Had it not been for the High Tree tribe in the depths of the Appalachian Mountains, there were still many Cherokee tribes between the tribe and the colonists. With the greed of these English colonists, they might have targeted the star aimed at the Gaoshu tribe. It was a little strange to see that his guardian looked at those Vasicus. His face changed again and again. Hong Yun finally couldn't help asking, "Are you not welcome these Vasicus?" Hong Yun's words awakened Shi Xiong from his contemplation. He was taken aback for a moment, then shook his head and said, "It's not that these Englishmen are not welcome, but all Vasicus are not welcome." Shi Xiong looked at the 2 Englishmen who were negotiating with Li Lei. They were wearing the most popular red military uniforms in Britain at this time. Shi Xiong also judged their origins from their military uniforms. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the military uniforms of various European countries still had their own characteristics. You can tell which country's military uniforms are at a glance. But after the 18th century, the military uniforms of various European countries have almost become the same as those carved out of a mold: 3-cornered hats and tuxedos. The only thing that can distinguish the uniforms of various countries is the color. Like Austria's military uniforms are white, Prussian military uniforms are Prussian blue, Russian military uniforms are green, French military uniforms are sky blue, and English military uniforms are red. The red military uniform worn by the Englishmen was also called the Red Shrimp uniform in later generations. The English soldier wearing the Red Shrimp uniform was also called the Red Shrimp Soldier. In fact, until the 21st century, the British Royal Guard retained the color of the uniform of the 18th century. Although the hat was replaced with a precious black bearskin hat, you can still see the style of the English Red Shrimp. The Vasicus who came to the Gaoshu tribe all wore red tuxedos, black cocked hats, black breeches and high riding boots underneath. At first glance, they knew they were elites in the English army. Is not an elite, nor dare to go hundreds of miles to the Gaoshu tribe. In fact, the object of trading with the Gaoshu tribe in these decades has always been the English army. Why? These Vasicus have always treated our tribe well since they started trading with our tribe. They also brought us many things that our tribe doesn't have, such as ironware, those green beautiful crystals, grain seeds, fine wine, cotton cloth, etc. These are all things the tribe urgently needs. They are weasels giving New Year greetings to chickens. Weasel. Chicken? Hong Yun was puzzled. Anyway, I didn't mean it well. Shi Xiong didn't bother to explain to Hong Yun, but he still said, "Your Cabru's prophecy of offering sacrifices to ancestors is correct. The Great Sun once pointed me out. These Vasicus are not too powerful now. Once they become strong, they will not use this trading method for our people. They will ride on horses and use their muskets to us. Something. Even slaughter our people. Now they are using this seemingly fair way of trading. In fact, they are slowly accumulating strength." "Is this true?" Hong Yun asked with some horror. "I don't know whether it's true or not. Anyway, if we don't become stronger on our own, then we are destined to be slaughtered by the descendants of Vasiku. But the Great Sun also pointed me to me, as long as we can rapid development and growth, uniting all compatriots who can unite to form a powerful regime, then these Vasicus dare not do anything to us." After a pause, Shi Xiong looked at Hong Yun's eyes and said, "The Great Sun pointed me to lead all the people to resist the invasion of Vasiku, and I'm doing this work now. You teach the people how to grow food, how to tame bison, how to build steel, and how to make salt. Is this your job? Hong Yun asked excitedly. This is just the basis for us to become stronger. We are too far behind these Vasaches, not to mention, just the muskets in the hands of the Vasaches are not something that our swords and axes can deal with. Yes, and if we want to develop stronger than the Vasaches, we must do all the basic things well, so as to surpass these Vasaches. www.wuxiaspad.com Speaking, Shi Xiong points to those two. An English officer carrying a musket said, "When we can make qualified steel, then we can build the musket ourselves, and I promise to be more advanced and more powerful than the muskets carried by these Vasaches. But I heard that if you use a musket, you need to use a kind of magical gunpowder." Hearing that the guardian said that the clansman could also make a musket, Hong Yun was a little excited. The gunpowder you said is actually very easy to make, even the more powerful gunpowder. The Supreme Sun has given me instructions on how to do it. It's just that we don't have a musket now. It's too early to make those things. Shi Xiong's words made Hong Yun's eyes all worshipful gazes. This kind of gaze made Shi Xiong's old face a bit hot. Although Hong Yun is the sacrifice of the tribe, she is very clear that whether a tribe can develop and grow, the force of force is definitely the first. The reason why the Cherokees were expelled by the Iroquois and Delawares was because their fists were not as big as others. And if the guardian can really create the powerful muskets that the Vasaches hold, then it would be impossible for the Cherokee to fight back to the Great Lakes area. Of course, Hong Yun did not forget what the guardian said about these Vasaches, so after a while, Hong Yun asked in a low voice, "Would you like to expel these Vasaches, or simply?" Hong Yun made a beheading motion. Shi Xiong shook his head again. "Don't do this. Don't do this for now. At least these English people have not turned our face with us. We also need to maintain a smooth transaction channel with them, because I also need some from the European continent, materials or people." Chapter 78, Seed. Although Shi Xiong wanted to get along with the two English officers, he couldn't do it now. The rules of the tribe still cannot be changed, so if they come forward to negotiate with these representatives of Vasaku, only the leader of the tribe, Li Lei, has this power. Shi Xiong knows very well that with his current prestige, even if he talks to the two English officers now, there will be no clansman saying anything. But it is always bad. People with higher prestige should pay more attention to their own way of doing things, especially the things that break the rules. If you can't do it, this thing really corrupts prestige. Especially the body of Shi Xiong contains a person from the soul more than 250 years later, and he especially likes to change the current situation, but to change, it will inevitably break the rules. No one may care about once or twice, but if there are too many, it will inevitably lead to a series of unnecessary accidents. If you want to change the rules or break the existing rules, you must wait until the conditions are right. Well, for example, you have complete control of the tribe, or you can become the leader of the tribe or even the chief of the Cherokee tribe. After the two English officers had left, Hong Yun and Shi Xiong walked towards the wooden house where Li Lei lived. The real deal will not start until 3 or 4 days later. Vasachu's trading team will only go here, and they will not go west. Therefore, the small tribes around the Gaoshu tribe have to be notified one by one, and the real transaction will not start until the small tribes arrive at the Gaoshu tribe with their things. Of course, as the Vasaches who have brought many rare things to the Gaoshu tribe, even if they don't get the right to live in the tribe's wooden huts, their usual meals are absolutely fine. The Gaoshu tribe will help them for more than 20. The Vasaches prepare enough meat and food, and will send soldiers to guard them. Chief, what did the Vasaches bring this time? Is there anything worth paying attention to? Privately, Hong Yun was very relaxed in front of Li Lei, not only because she was Kabru to worship, but also because Li Lei was her uncle. Although it has been a while since he took over Kabru's sacrifice, Hong Yun's mentality has not yet been fully adjusted. It will take a certain amount of time. Li Lei said nothing to Hong Yun, as if the relationship between mother-in-law and uncle is not only popular in China, but also in this ignorant and backward Indian tribe. Li Lei seemed to be in a good mood. He smiled and said, "Basically, It is no different from the goods traded 3 months ago. It is nothing more than ironware, cotton cloth, wine, the green crystals called glass by the Wasikas, etc. Oh, yes, these Vasikas said this time that they also brought 2 new kinds of seeds, like rice and cotton. Hearing the words rice and cotton, Shi Xiong's eyes lit up immediately. After seeing Hong Yun as if he stopped asking questions, he immediately asked, "Chief, do you really have rice and cotton seeds?" Li Lei glanced at Shi Xiong strangely. He had never seen this kind of expression on the face of this young but actually very sophisticated young man. But Li Lei nodded. Yes, the leader of the Vasiku trading team said that there are these 2 seeds. Why, are these 2 seeds important? Shi Xiong said without hesitation. Yes, boss. These 2 kinds of seeds are actually the seeds of 2 crops. Rice can produce a kind of grain called rice. The output should be about the same as wheat. The key is rice. The taste is very good. As for cotton seeds, the fruit that comes out after the thing is planted can be transformed into cotton after a series of processing. The raw materials used in the cotton traded by the Vasikas are produced from this crop. The expressions of Hong Yun and Li Lei changed drastically. Put the rice aside first. But the cotton cloth is really a good thing. If your tribe can produce cotton cloth, then the tribe will not have to spend precious fur to exchange cotton cloth every year. Li Lei asked in a deep voice, "Guardian, what are you saying is true?" "Yes, it is absolutely true." "So the boss, we must take down the seeds of these 2 crops, which will increase the strength of our tribe by a large level." Li Lei and Hong Yun glanced at each other, and Hong Yun said, "Boss, since the guardian said so, then we will give priority to these seeds. What we have prepared is enough." Li Lei nodded. "We have enough things, but seeds have always been the tightest thing those Vasikas hold. To exchange these seeds, we need to pay a lot of money." Hong Yun said, "It's okay, isn't it just paying more fur? Our tribe can afford it." Li Lei nodded, but the stone bear on the side smiled and said, "Boss, Kabru sacrifices. In fact, we don't need to exchange more furs, gems, and yellow iron for the Vasikas this time. Things. How is this possible? The most wanted things for those Vasikas are yellow iron and gems, followed by furs. If we don't exchange these things for the things they bring, they won't buy them. Things were exchanged for us." As he said, Li Lei suddenly thought of something. His face changed. "Guardian, you better not try to rob or kill these Vasikas. If we do, then these Vasikas will not come to our tribe to trade in the future. We want to get the things of Vasiku, or we will bring the goods to the king's court to exchange them, or we will go to those in the east. The place of residence of the Vasikas is exchanged. However, either of these 2 methods are very food and manpower consuming methods, and we cannot do this." "Chief, I think you have misunderstood me. I didn't want to rob these Vasikas, let alone kill them now. I mean, we now have something better than fur in our hands. Why don't we use these things to exchange it?" "Something better than fur?" Li Lei and Hong Yun were puzzled. "If there are such good things, why don't we know?" "Yes, it is something more popular than fur. This kind of thing itself is not of high value, but those Vasikas desperately need this kind of thing. So the popularity of this kind of thing on Vasiku's side, it can even be compared with yellow iron and gems." Seeing that Shi Xiong said so surely, Hong Yun suddenly asked, "Dali, are you talking about salt?" Shi Xiong smiled slightly. "Bingo, that's table salt. We can use the salt made by the tribesmen these days to exchange anything we need with those Vasikas, and we have the final say. These tiles the West choose can't resist the temptation of salt. Believe me, if we negotiate with the Vasikas according to the method I said, those Vasikas will be firmly pinched in our palms." Chapter 79, "You ungrateful animal." Li Lei knows that salt is not only extremely popular among Indian compatriots in the interior, but even in the places where the Vasikas live in the east, salt is also a very popular commodity, even more popular than fur. I heard that on the land across the ocean, salt is even more sought after. To be honest, after Hong Yun uttered the word salt, Li Lei understood what the guardian meant. Whether it was the leader of the tribe who had been rushing to make salt a few days ago, or the justified remarks just now, It means that the guardian has probably targeted this transaction more than 10 days ago. Even, he just wanted to use salt to trade with those Vasaches. Although Li Lei also agrees with this method in his heart, because he knows the value of the salt. After adopting the guardian's method of making salt, a thing that was cherished in the past, can't be said to be a bed street in the tribe, but every household has a dozen or even dozens of bags of salt. Things can't be eaten as rice, so why do you store so much salt? So much salt, even if only a part of it is taken out, it is enough to exchange all the goods brought by the Vasaches. Li Lei really agreed with this trading method, but the tone of the guardian's words really made Li Lei a little uncomfortable. According to your method to negotiate with Vasaku, do you still use your method to negotiate? I can also use the salt for a lot of things, okay? Li Lei complained in his heart, and brought it out without realizing it. That kind of impatient expression. Seeing Li Lei's face change and not speaking for a long time, Shi Xiong immediately understood Li Lei's thoughts, so Shi Xiong simply said to Hong Yun, "Kabru sacrifice, please allow me to preside over this transaction. I guarantee that our tribe will get the most benefit." For Li Lei, a tribal leader who was a little fearful and not cheerful at all, Shi Xiong was really disappointed in his heart. Such a leader may be well preserved, but let him open up the frontiers. It is purely dreaming. The most important thing is that this guy is really a little careful. As the party involved, Shi Xiong is not the silly head who didn't know anything before. He naturally felt the transformation of Li Lei. If it is said that when he first came to Gaoshu tribe, Li Lei was about to go to see his ancestors because he was about to be seriously injured, so he would unconditionally support him, then since this guy's injury has improved miraculously, Shi Xiong felt the change in his attitude towards himself. Especially today, this kind of transaction, although the transaction is solely responsible by your tribe leader, but also, if you appoint a person to be responsible for the transaction, it is also not a bad rule. For the leader of the tribe, Li Lei, appointing a special person to be responsible for this transaction is just a matter of lip service, but for such a thing, this guy is greedy for power and is not willing to let go. This is really unreasonable. So Shi Xiong was very direct and didn't give Li Lei face. Is this kind of thing useful in private? Is your face important, or is it important that I exchange more things with those Englishmen? If you want face, then you have to have that strength too. Hearing this, Hong Yun looked at Li Lei with a little embarrassment, but she was only slightly embarrassed for a moment, and immediately nodded and said, "Okay, I agree with your proposal." Then Hong Yun turned to Li Lei and said, "The leader, you can leave the dealings with those Vasakas to Big Bear. I believe he can do better than us." Li Lei's face immediately turned red. Although he was the leader of the tribe, he knew very well who the true leader of the tribe was. It was the Kabul sacrifice. Even the leader of the tribe could not violate the Kabul sacrifice order, otherwise it is a traitor. Hong Yun was not like this before, including Hong Yun's mother, but since this silly head came to the tribe, everything has changed. If I knew it would be like this, I shouldn't have accepted those people from the long-hair cattle tribe. Everything is the fault of this silly head. Li Lei stared at the stone bear angrily, to paraphrase the words that later generations have used up. If his eyes could kill people, the stone bear would have died countless times. But Shi Xiong just looked back coldly. His cold eyes did not contain a trace of color, and even a trace of murderous aura that was imperceptible. Li accepted the remnants of the long-hair cattle tribe. No matter when, I will thank you for this. I will remember this kindness, and I will return it at the right time. Kindly. But you can't hold back grace and be proud of you. You are the leader of a tribe. You should have the mind that a leader should have. I asked myself that everything I did was for the tribe, not for the individual. But why do you still have such a big opinion on me? Okay, since you are like this, then I will say something unpleasant. Give you a face? You don't want to www.wuxiaspot.com, then you don't want to have a face. It's not that I didn't know about it, you bow. It's really that this kind of things for the tribe can't be mixed with personal feelings. If you still don't know the interest of Li Lei, then my stone bear can only remove your stumbling block regardless of kindness. As for killing Li Lei, Shi Xiong still couldn't do that, at least he couldn't do such a thing to Li Lei. After all, Li Lei could be regarded as his lifesaver. Therefore, if this guy really doesn't know how to count, Shi Xiong can only ask him to take care of him. Facing Shi Xiong's eyes that did not carry any emotion, Li Lei suddenly felt that all the tens of thousands of hairs on his body had exploded. The anger just now made him lose his usual calmness, but these two are not. Eyes with any emotions are like two basins of ice water, extinguishing the soaring anger head-on. Only then did Li Lei remember how powerful this big and intimidating guy was. The wolf's tail, which can be called the first warrior of the tribe, was weak in front of him like a wild rabbit in front of a black bear. The most important thing is that this guy also has a more daunting identity, the Son of God. No matter how unpleasant to look at Shi Xiong, Li Lei still firmly believes in Shi Xiong as the Son of God. Li Lei suddenly recovered his composure, and immediately realized his mistake. Even if the weather today is a bit gloomy and the temperature in the wooden house is not high, Sin's sweat still ran down the temples in an instant. Li Lei looked away from the stone bear, swallowed dryly, hesitated and said, "Since you want to talk to those Vasikas, then you will preside over this transaction. I will be in the tribe in the afternoon, announcing this." Chapter 80. For the tribe. Li Lei walked out of the house a little embarrassed, forgetting that this wooden house was his home. This kind of gaffe performance made Hong Yun look worried and said, "Li Xiong, did the leader's actions make you feel uncomfortable?" Shi Xiong looked at this 20-year-old woman. Even if her identity was the honorable Kabu sacrifice, even if she was the mother of 2 children, she was still only 20 years old. In future generations, such a big girl is still studying in college. Shook his head slightly and said, "Lay leader Li Lei has some problems with his vision and mind, but it's not his fault. His knowledge limits his vision and mind." "Then can you not do it to him? After all," Hong Yun hesitated, "after all, he is my Shekinah, uncle." Shi Xiong looked at her, smiled slightly, and said sincerely, "Hong Yun, you should know what my ambition is. Although I was born and raised in the Longhair Cattle tribe, I am now a member of the Gaoshu tribe, and whether it's the Shaggy Cattle tribe or the High Tree tribe, isn't it all a family? We are all descendants of Kabulu's sacrifice." As he said, Shi Xiong pushed open the door of the wooden house, bent over slightly and said, "Let's go. Let's talk as we go. There are some things I need to talk to you carefully." Hong Yun obediently followed the stone bear out of the wooden house where Li Lei lived, and the two walked towards the wooden house where Hong Yun lived. The distance between the two was not too far, only tens of meters. After entering the house, Shi Xiong closed the door, watching the red cloud sitting on the stone bench, and continued to say sincerely, "Since the ancestor of Kabulu sacrificed his tribe to leave Cherokee more than 200 years ago, Wang Ting, haven't we, as descendants, ever thought of going back to the Wang Ting again?" Hong Yun's eyes nodded in fascination, obviously thinking of something wonderful. Who doesn't want to return to the royal court in glory? "Unfortunately, we can't do it. One is that we can't violate the order of our ancestors not to return to the royal court. The other is that although the Kabru sacrifice now looks very glorious on the surface, it is actually—" Alas! Hong Yun's eyes returned to clarity, and he sighed long. Stone Xiong said, "So, my goal is not to let the Kabulu sacrifice clan return to the royal court. My goal is to make the High Tree tribe where the Kabulu sacrifice is located become the royal court of the Cherokee clan. And, I also want to lead our High Tree tribe to lay down the Great Lakes region, and I want to make our Cherokee rulers of the Great Lakes. Not only that, there is even more expansive land to the west of this continent. I want to lead the tribe conquered the Chicashes, and then crossed the river to continue to conquer the land over there. I want our Gaoshu tribe to become the center of this continent. Even those Vasikas must live honestly under our rule down. This is my goal." Listening to Shi Xiong's words, Hong Yun's cheeks started to flush. Of course she knew that once the words of the guardian could become reality, then her Kabul priest would really become the supreme high priest. At that time, the glory of the Kabul priest was not limited to Cherokee, but will shine on this vast land. However, in order to accomplish such a goal, we still have a lot of foundation and preparations to do. We must have sufficient food so that we can feed more fighters, so I began to guide our people to adopt new farming methods because of this. Let us get more food. Our fighters need more advanced weapons, so I began to guide our people to make steel, because this will give us weapons made of steel and even muskets and artillery. We need more salt, will attract more tribesmen to join us. The strength of a tribe requires many tribesmen, so I began to guide our tribesmen to make salt. In the future, I will guide our tribesmen to do more things. I will teach them more skills, so that we can make our Gaoshu tribe more powerful. Shi Xiong stood in front of Hong Yun, raising his hands and said passionately. Afterwards, his expression became cold. All of this is instructed by the Supreme Sun to do this. This is the will of the Supreme Sun God. However, to do all this, it will inevitably touch the leader of Lilei. The power controlled by Lilei's opposition to me is understandable. However, this cannot be a reason to hinder me, because between the Supreme Sun and the tribal leader, we will inevitably obey the Supreme Sun without hesitation. It's the will of the people, and I don't have selfish intentions when I do it. All I do is for the tribe. Shi Xiong looked at Hong Yun's eyes. So, my Kabu sacrifice, please persuade Lilei to stop doing those unnecessary obstacles. If he is still obsessed with it, www.wuxiasp.com, I will invite him from the position of leader of the tribe. And for this, I need your full support. Hong Yun's expression darkened, but then he nodded very firmly and said, Dali Zhong, I understand what you mean. I can see everything you have done these days. I believe that everything you do it is the will of the Supreme Sun God, so I will fully support you without reservation. I will persuade the leader of Lilei. If he really does not listen to the persuasion, such tribal leader will not continue to be the leader. It's necessary. Hong Yun's words made Shi Xiong's heart warm. But, Great Bear, I still want to beg you, if Chief Lilei really doesn't listen to advice, I hope you don't hurt his life. After all, he was fatally injured some time ago, and now his injury can get better. The favor of gods and ancestors. Shi Xiong nodded his head and said, I can promise you this. As long as Lilei and his people do not endanger my life, I will not take the initiative to hurt his life. I can spare the wolf tail. Leader Lilei, why can't I forgive it? Actually, in my eyes, whether it is the leader of Lilei or anyone else, there is only one identity, and that is my tribe. Unless I have to, I will not kill my tribe. After all, my duty is to strengthen our tribe, to protect our tribe, not to kill our tribe. Hong Yun nodded in satisfaction. Okay, please take care of persuading the leader Lilei. I am going to the Wasiku camp now. I want to reconsider the list of traded goods with them. This time I will definitely let those Wasikas leave everything they can. I am confident that I can do this. P.S. Bo to thank a fatty man in Inner Mongolia for the reward of 100. Chapter 81, Major Hank. William Hank is very upset now. As a major in the Royal British Army, he was sent by his boss to such a ghost place where birds don't and chickens don't lay eggs to trade with those savages. This kind of life used to have a low-level officer. Leading is enough, but why should I let the major lead the team this time? Could it be that Lao Tzu broke through, that Colonel Jones and Mrs. Charles stole it and he knew it? Jones, this fellow, is revenge on me? It must be like that, otherwise why would Jones want me to lead the team here to trade with these savages? Sitting in the ventilated tent, William Hank spit heavily, then ferociously unscrewed a precious bottle of whiskey brewed in a Scottish distillery, and drank a fierce sip. He burped alcohol as if he was taking a breath. The bottle of wine in his hand is worth 2 royal rose gold coins. It is a very precious bottle of wine. The other 4 bottles of wine like this bottle of wine are also the most precious of this batch of goods. That fellow Jones wants me to exchange a bottle of this kind of wine for 100 skins. Go ahead. Dare to send Lao Tzu to this kind of ghost place. Lao Tzu must drink your wine. Major Hank took another big sip, and his face suddenly became flushed. This Scottish whiskey is made with barley mixed with other grains. After several distillations, it has a high degree of strength. Although Major Hank is tall and strong, he still can't resist this kind of high alcohol. The journey from Jamestown to here is more than 600 miles, not to mention the long distance, and it is particularly difficult to walk, especially after entering the Appalachian Mountains. There is almost no road to walk, and the most troublesome thing was the sneak attack by those damned Pointons before entering the mountains. Although the British Empire has completely defeated the Pointons, there are still some dead-headed Pointons who secretly attacked the British. They will burn the tobacco fields and farmland of the British, and they will attack the British who are alone. Even if Colonel Hank and his group are all elite army soldiers, they are trembling along the way, for fear of encountering a large group of Pointons. God bless. I didn't encounter a large group of Pointons on the way here. The scattered dozens of Pointons are simply not enough to see the flintlocks in the hands of the soldiers. It's not a vegetarian, Major Hank said to himself, can walk here peacefully. This is already God bless. Major Hank raised the bottle of whiskey worth 2 royal rose gold coins in his hand and shook it gently, very satisfied. Major Hank knew very well that even in Jamestown or in the UK, this type of whiskey is not something people like him can drink. According to the current currency regulations, 2 royal rose gold coins are equivalent to 4 pounds. At this time, the British workers were busy for a year, but they could only harvest a dozen pounds, and the money had to support their families. As a major officer of the Royal Army, Captain Hank's salary for a year is only 48 pounds. In other words, Major Hank's salary for 1 month is enough to buy such a bottle of wine. But now, this precious whiskey that could only be seen but not drunk and could not be drunk before, is held in Captain Hank's hand, and there are 2 big mouthfuls of this kind of liquor in his stomach. I want to exchange a bottle of wine for 100 skins, Jones, you bitch. Dream. Beaver skins are now a very popular high-end fur in Europe. A complete skin is worth 2 shillings. If this bottle of whiskey worth 4 pounds can be exchanged for 100 skins, then it will be shipped to the UK. After that, they can sell at a high price of 200 shillings. Now 1 pound is worth 20 shillings, and 1 shilling is worth 12 pence. In other words, these 200 shillings are worth 10 pounds. 5 bottles of wine are 50 pounds, and Jones that can make a net profit of 30 pounds by changing hands. 30 pounds is definitely a huge sum of money in this era. The UK has not yet implemented the gold standard, and the pound sterling has not yet been pegged to gold. At this time, the pound sterling is far more valuable than later generations of pound sterling. Now 1 pound is equivalent to 1 pound of silver, and 30 pounds is equivalent to 30 pounds of silver. But at this time, silver is not very popular anymore, and krona silver coins made of silver have gradually begun to withdraw from the market. However, according to the current Bank of England regulations, the exchange ratio of gold to silver is 1:15.2. That is to say, if the 30 pounds is converted into gold, it can be exchanged for almost 2 pounds of gold, which is almost 0.9 kilograms of gold. In later modern times, these golds are worth almost 300,000 RMB. Major Hank does not like banknotes or silver coins. His favorite is gold. He came to the New World, also for gold. According to the soldiers who returned from the New World is full of wealth. Those stupid barbarians have a lot of good things in their hands. Unfortunately, those barbarians are so stupid that they can exchange more than 10 precious skins with a single iron pot, and a high bottle of whiskey can be exchanged for dozens or even hundreds of skins. If Major Hank knew something about later generations, www.wuxiaspot.com, he would describe the New World like this: stupid people come more quickly. Therefore, Lieutenant Hank, who was still a lieutenant 3 years ago, followed the Royal Navy ships to the New World, because here was not only to fight the barbarians, but also to fight the French. So before leaving, Lieutenant Hank was promoted to Captain Hank. Then in the past few years, he has fought bravely, commanded well, and was promoted to Major, which is considered to be among the middle-level officers of the Royal Army. Of course, in the past few years, he has also earned a lot of gold from the trade between the soldiers and the barbarians. But what he didn't expect was that Colonel Jones, the highest commander of the Royal Army in Jamestown, sent him to such a place to make a deal, which really made Major Hank angry. Originally, Major Hank regarded Colonel Jones as the best leader, but this time, Colonel Jones's image in his eyes was completely destroyed. So, Major Hank will take revenge on that Colonel Jones. Of course, he has no way to retaliate against Colonel Jones in Jamestown. As the highest military officer there, if Major Hank dared to do anything extraordinary, without Colonel Jones taking action, the guards around him would shoot Hank to death. Majors. That's why Major Hank is here to ruin Colonel Jones' goods. Took another sip of alcohol. Major Hank felt his head was a little dizzy, so he decided not to drink any more today. But this wine is really good. It is worthy of the top wine worth £4. Just after plugging the bottle stopper again, I heard a voice outside. Major, is it convenient for you now? The people from the Gaoshu tribe want to talk to you. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 82, Stowaways from the British Empire. Hearing this voice, Major Hank knew who was speaking outside. He was the second military commander of this team, Mr. Patrick Ferguson, the second lieutenant of the Royal British Army. Come in, Lieutenant Ferguson. The effect of alcohol made Major Hank's voice a little lazy. The curtain of the tent was opened, and a tall but thin young man walked in. The young man looked only in his 20s and looked very immature. His golden hair was neatly combed. The uniform on his body is also neat and tidy. From these small details, it can be seen that this second lieutenant officer is a very careful and rigorous person. After Lieutenant Ferguson came in, he first saluted a military salute, and then said, "Sir, 2 barbarians have come outside. They said they need to talk to you about the transaction." Hearing this, Major Hank frowned slightly, and said in a puzzled way, "Didn't we talk about it in the morning? We talked with the leader of this tribe in person, so why are they coming to talk again?" Lieutenant Ferguson shook his head and said he didn't know. Major Hank pointed to a rock opposite him and said, "Sit there and tell me what you think." Major Hank still appreciates this young Ensign Ferguson. Generally speaking, a 20-year-old soldier or a low-level officer has an unstable personality and is easily impulsive, so he often makes some inexplicable mistakes. But the young lieutenant in front of him did not have those shortcomings. He was really calm and made almost no mistakes, which made Major Hank appreciate it. While in Jamestown, Major Hank and some friends talked about Lieutenant Ferguson more than once. Major Hank concluded that as long as this Lieutenant Ferguson could survive on the battlefield, his future would be bright. Judging from the character and style of this kid, he is very suitable as a commander on the battlefield. Lieutenant Ferguson sat on the big rock obediently, with limited conditions, and could only use this stone as a stool. After sitting down, Lieutenant Ferguson said, "Sir, I don't know why these 2 savages came to you, but I think you'd better meet them." "Well, how do you say?" "One of the savages is quite scary. Our soldiers said that the guy may have been reincarnated as a bear." "Oh, it's scary?" Major Hank came in interest. "Yes, it's quite scary." Lieutenant Ferguson seemed to think of the big guy he had just met, and couldn't help but swallowed. "That's really a strong and shameless barbarian. I have never seen such a strong man." "The big guy, it's enviable and a little scary." As Lieutenant Ferguson said, Major Hank became more interested. He grabbed his military uniform and put it on, and stroked his hair. Then he fastened his buttons and walked out. "Go, take me to see that big guy." When Major Hank saw Stone Bear, his face also showed an incredible expression. To be honest, Major Hank has never seen such a great physique. He had seen people as tall as this barbarian, but most of them were fat or bloated. But the barbarian in front of him is not only tall and intimidating, but the most important thing is his muscles, which is really enviable and a little scary. Even through the thick animal skin clothes, Major Hank could still feel the explosive power contained in that body. Damn, how could there be such a strong guy in this world? Even among those black slaves, you can hardly see such a strong guy. Could this big guy really reincarnated as a bear? However, the military qualities of an officer quickly recovered Major Hank. He was about to reach out and invite the translator in the team, when he saw that the big man on the opposite side made a very elegant and standard gentleman's gift. Then he opened his mouth and almost made Major Hank jump up. "Hello, nice to meet you. My name is—" This big man can speak fluent English, and he is still a standard London accent. What a hell. Not only Major Hank, but also Lieutenant Ferguson next to him, other soldiers and the translator from Jamestown, all looked like a ghost. A barbarian can speak a fluent London accent. This situation is almost better than when you wake up in the morning and see a dog that you have raised for 5 or 6 years. Then you say hello to your pet, and the dog suddenly opens his mouth to talk, to stimulate people. At this moment, Major Hank suddenly felt that his brain didn't seem to be enough. The sturdy and terrifying big guy in front of him was able to speak a fluent London accent. This is something Major Hank has never had since he came to the New World. Things encountered. He has met barbarians who can speak English, and barbarians who can speak French, Dutch, and even German. www.wuxiaspa.com. But those savages have a very strange accent, if they speak a little faster and fundamentally just don't understand. The most important thing is that when communicating with these guys who act as translators or barbarian messengers, you have to make gestures. Otherwise communication is really difficult. But what's the matter with this big guy in front of me? This fluent London accent is even more standard than his own accent. Is this guy an Englishman who smuggled over from the British Empire? It is not only Major Hank who has such an idea. It is estimated that all the British people at the scene are thinking that at this time. Looking at the dumbfounded group of British people in front of him, Shi Xiong couldn't help but feel a coke in his heart. When he was in university, his English teacher was a returnee who had studied in London for several years, and his London accent was extremely standard. As a child from the countryside, Shi Xiong believes that knowledge changes destiny, so he learns English with this returnee teacher very seriously. With his own efforts and the unforgettable perverted memory, Shi Xiong passed level 6 in just 2 years. Just like the list of people who can be selected to visit and study at the Appalachian Frontier Museum in the United States in the past life, it also has a great relationship with Shi Xiong's superb English proficiency this guy follows, and we can save the cost of hiring translators. These are the original words of a certain leader of the museum. So, Shi Xiong was lucky to have the first opportunity to go abroad in his life in the 36th year of his life. Got on a plane stupidly, came to Tennessee stupidly, followed the leaders in a stupid manner for several days, and finally stumbled into a Cadillac more than 250 years ago. Chapter 83, How can that be? Are you really an Indian, not a citizen of our British Empire? In Major Hank's tent, the majestic Royal British Army Major asked again. He had asked the same question 3 times. Yes, this is the 4th time. Although Lieutenant Ferguson didn't ask, he still had the same expression. Obviously he still didn't quite believe what Shi Xiong said just now. After all, the fluent London accent and the standard aristocratic courtesy are not something a barbarian in the New World can learn. In fact, even in the UK, people who can freely use the gentleman's courtesy and communicate with such an accent are true nobles. Even Major Hank and himself couldn't do such a move. Shi Xiong coughed helplessly, and turned the subject off abruptly. Major Hank, I'm here to discuss the content of our transaction with you this time. Well, there are some in our tribe that you should be very good at. Interesting things. When our leader talked with you before, we didn't say those things. This time I got the joint authorization of the Kabul priest and the leader to talk to you about the trading methods of these things. I believe I will definitely be interested in these things in our hands. These words also made Major Hank realize that he was out of state, so he shook his head slightly, as if to shake his curiosity out of his head, and then asked, I don't know, Mr. Guardian wants to trade. What is added to the item? In the self-introduction just now, Shi Xiong said that he was named Great Bear, and he also said that he was the guardian of Kabru of the High Tree tribe. Now Major Hank calls Shi Xiong the guardian. Shi Xiong smiled slightly and nodded to Kuwama beside him. Kuwama took a small animal skin bag from his waist and handed it to Major Hank. Such a tiny bag of animal skins is not much bigger than the palm of a 5 or 6-year-old child. How much can it put in? Major Hank took the animal skin bag with a puzzled look, and looked at the guardian who was as steady as Mount Tai. After gently squeezing it, he carefully untied the rope at the mouth of the animal skin bag. A small pile of crystal clear white and extremely delicate powder appeared in front of Major Hank and Lieutenant Ferguson. After seeing the small pile of white powder, the two of them were stunned for a moment, and then they rubbed their own, with both eyes. It seemed that he didn't believe that the little things in front of him were real. Afterwards, the two people almost coincidentally once again made a motion similar to that of a human being inhaling before death, and then it was like two wild dogs that had taken off the rein. One had leaped on the small pile of white and delicate, on the powdery stone. The stone was the one where Lieutenant Ferguson was sitting before. It was the one that Major Hank ordered the soldiers to find both as a stool and as a table. This is. Major Hank and Lieutenant Ferguson raised their heads and looked at each other in unison, and said these two words almost in unison. Major Hank nodded slightly, then lowered his head, stretched out an index finger tremblingly, dipped it in the small pile of white and delicate powder, and put his index finger into his mouth. The opposite Lieutenant Ferguson did the same action, and the result was that both of them were dumbfounded. This white and delicate powder is put in the mouth, and there is no other taste except the rich salty taste. This turned out to be salt, edible salt, and it's the most top-notch salt. They are both officers of the Royal Army of the British Empire, so they can clearly distinguish the identity of these white powder particles. Just how is this possible? How could there be such a taste of table salt in this world? How could there be any salt in this world? The most important thing is, how could this kind of salt, which is absolutely the best salt that two people have ever seen in their lives, appeared in the hands of two barbarians? This kind of table salt, let alone the army, even if it is almost impossible to see on the tables of those nobles, maybe the king of the British Empire can taste such exquisite table salt. In order to make sure that this is table salt, the two of them tasted it again, and they were convinced that this small pile of white, crystal clear and delicate powder is table salt, the top salt that has never been seen before in life. What is table salt? As an officer of the Royal Army of the British Empire, both Major Hank and Lieutenant Ferguson knew well. For the British Empire in this era, the preciousness of this thing is really no less precious than gold. As early as a few hundred years ago in the Middle Ages, when the British upper class had banquets, the location of the salt shakers on the table was above the owner's seat. Sitting on the top of the salt means sitting at the place closest to the owner. The respective is equivalent to respecting as a guest of honor, and sitting at the bottom are some insignificant little people and ordinary guests. I'm reading www.youcanchew.com. At that time, salt was a status symbol. As of now, salt is still an extremely scarce material. In fact, in Britain in the 17th and 18th centuries, the salt was mainly sourced from foreign countries, mainly from the hostile country France. How to ensure the constant supply of salt was a very worrying and headache problem for the British king. At this time in Britain, every soldier received a large portion of salt, which is beyond the reach of ordinary people. With salt, soldiers can carry fresh meat on the march, and if necessary, they can be marinated for long-term preservation. The energy and nutrition provided by the meat ensure that the soldiers have a high combat effectiveness. The Anglo-French War that lasted 116 years more than 400 years ago was due to salt. It can be said that among the 13 colonies in the United Kingdom in this era, including the North American continent, the most demanded people are not gold and gems, nor fur, but salt. This thing is in short supply, second only to food. Even if Hank and Ferguson are both officers, the salt they distribute is the kind of salt with a bitter taste, and the color is not pure, so you can see that it is not a good thing. But even so, no one is willing to give up the salt allotted every month. But what kind of salt is this in front of me? Not to mention that this kind of salt is shipped back to the UK. Even if it gets Jamestown, it will cause a sensation. If there is enough such salt and then shipped back to the UK, it will not be as simple as causing a sensation. Even the nobles will break their heads because of this salt. Major Hank and Lieutenant Ferguson looked at each other again, and they both found the different looks revealed in each other's eyes. Chapter 84, Carrot and Stick. Knowing how shameless and brutal these colonists composed of criminals, Indentured slaves, bankrupts, and people at the bottom of the British mainland are. They didn't see these two officers because of salt, ecstatic and relaxed. On the contrary, Shi Xiong has been paying attention to the two of them very seriously. Thanks to the stone bears who knew about the virtues of North American colonists from previous lives, I was hesitant to trade salt out with these Wasatches at first, because the stone bears knew very well that the colonists in terms of beating nature, once they discovered that the small Gaoshu tribe can produce refined salt, these guys are most likely to rely on the heat weapons and horses in their hands to do something against the Gaoshu tribe. But Shi Xiong urgently needs some things from Europe, such as tools, raw materials and even talents, because Shi Xiong knows very well that relying on the people in his hand and the existing resources, if he wants to develop the Gaoshu tribe in a short period of time, it is tantamount to dreaming. Therefore, it is necessary to borrow from these colonists and even from the European continent. At least it is indispensable at this stage. But Europeans are not fools. If you want them to come up with sensitive things or even talents, they must have something to impress them. Gold and gemstones can certainly do this, but in terms of European greed, if the amount of gold and gemstones is small, it is estimated that these guys will look down upon them. But if there are too many, it will inevitably trigger the coveting of these colonists. In fact, before the founding of the United States, the colonists from Europe did not have a good person. Robbery and massacre are commonplace for them. This is not Europe with strict institutions and hierarchies, but a lawless new continent in North America. If you want to survive here or even make a fortune, it's absolutely impossible if your heart is not black and your hands are not cruel. Here, if you don't want to be someone else's prey, then you yourself must first become a hunter. Therefore, it is best not to take out too much of things like gold and gems, otherwise, with the beating nature of this group of colonists, they will really have a great possibility of sending troops to attack the Gaoshu tribe. So after thinking about it, Shi Xiong decided to take out the salt. This thing is extremely in demand, although it is not as valuable as gold and gems. It is a material that has a larger market than gold and gems. The most important thing is that salt needs people to make it. Even if the colonists come to grab it, it's not that they capture all the people who can make salt in the Gaoshu tribe, otherwise they won't get a steady stream of salt. It's as if the Pamunkeys in the east have always lived in the settlements of European colonists, but they are still free. Those Vasicus don't know how to make salt, so they can only ask the Pamunkey people who can make salt. Now, they have a better way to make salt than the Pamunkeys, and they can make larger and higher quality refined salt. As long as these colonists understand the meaning of long water, they won't risk the high numbers. Tribes do, on the contrary, if their leaders realize the importance of high numbers of tribes, they will even send troops to protect high numbers of tribes. At the very least, before the outbreak of the war alone, if the British gang wanted to get more refined salt, they would do it out of all likelihood. Shi Xiong knew that his guess should be more accurate, but he didn't dare to take it lightly. Did the ghost know that these two officers would go away as soon as they grabbed a fortune? They had 20 elite soldiers, all holding flintlock guns in their hands, so they had to guard against them. Sure enough, after seeing the unusual look in the eyes of Major Hank and Lieutenant Ferguson, Shi Xiong smiled and said, "Major Hank, if I were you, I would definitely take those that just came out of my heart." Damn, greed is firmly suppressed. I hope you can understand that this is the territory of the Gaoshu tribe. There are no less than 100 warriors around your camp, and they all have this in their hands, said. Shi Xiong smiled and drew a small axe, a small iron axe from his waist. The small axe doesn't look big, it's only about 1 foot long, but the axe blade that exudes cold light is silently telling its sharpness. This is a combat weapon specially used for throwing. We call it a throwing axe. When the Mongols hit Europe hundreds of years ago, your ancestors saw the power of this throwing axe, and you should be able to remember the power of Thylopero. Two such throwing axes may not have much power, but if dozens or even hundreds of throwing axes are thrown at the same time, the power of the two of you should be very clear. As he said, Shi Xiong turned around and opened the curtain of the tent, squeezed the throwing axe in his hand, and flicked his arm. The throwing axe in his hand broke through the air barrier in an instant, and he let out a dull sound. With the whistling sound, the next moment, on the trunk of a big tree about 30 meters away, the axe of this throwing axe slammed into the trunk. The faces of Major Hank and Lieutenant Ferguson changed suddenly. Shi Xiong turned around slowly, still with a smile on his face, as if he had done a very trivial thing, and then his left hand touched his waist again, and an identical throwing axe appeared in his hand again. Sorry, I forgot to mention that one of our tribe's warriors carries 2 throwing axes, and of course there are iron spears and bows that can be thrown farther. After a pause, Shi Xiong looked at the 2 ugly-faced officers in front of him, and continued to smile and say, "Your soldiers are holding the front-loaded muskets that were shaped by your British in 1730 www.wuxiaspit.com. You call it the Brown Beth Standard Rifle, which has a caliber of 7.6 inches, about 19 millimeters, and a lead shot with a diameter of 7.1 inches, about 18 millimeters. The best effective range will not exceed 90 meters, the loading speed will not exceed 3 rounds per minute, and this rifle still has a non-fire rate of about 30%. The most important thing is that you only have 20 people. Even if you use platoon guns, how many can you handle? Where's the throwing axe? Oh, right, and the iron spear and bow and arrow that are more lethal in the hands of our tribal warriors?" The faces of the 2 men who said this were pale, as officers. They knew that what this strong barbarian had just said was good, but how could this guy know the characteristics and shortcomings of these guns? Shi Xiong's face was stern, and he said viciously, "So, I advise you, it is better to put away that greed that shouldn't be there. I hope you are here for the purpose of making money instead of grabbing a grab and leaving. If you 2 want to make a fortune, I will give you an excellent opportunity. This is the refined salt. I will hand over the refined salt produced by our tribe to you to represent." "Oh sorry, forgot to mention the production capacity of our tribe refined salt. If our tribe is fully productive, it can produce about 30,000 pounds of refined salt a month. I wonder if this amount of refined salt will make you 2 rich?" Shi Xiong's deterrence by force just now and the words full of temptation and deceit made the faces of the 2 officers turn blue and white. Obviously, they are now fighting with heaven and man in their hearts. Shi Xiong was very satisfied with their performance. To deal with this kind of people, you have to use carrots and sticks to scare them and then give them some benefits. As long as they can clearly recognize the benefits in this matter, then this matter is completely settled. Chapter 85, Hank and number 039:S plan. Seeing the 2 officers caught in entanglement, Shi Xiong smiled again. "I won't bother you. I will wait outside for your final decision, but I hope you can give me a good answer. I hope this paradise like a paradise will be bloody." As he said, Shi Xiong waved his hand, and Kuema followed him and walked out of the tent. Outside, 18 soldiers from the Royal British Empire were cautiously surrounding the tent with their guns. Seeing this extremely strong barbarian walking out of the tent, these soldiers were slightly relieved, but then they whispered quietly. Some soldiers also pointed at the stone bear, seeming to wonder why there are such strong soldiers among the barbarians. The axe shocked these soldiers just now. They had never seen a small iron axe capable of erupting such a powerful force. Just now there was even a brave soldier sneaking up to the big tree. I tried to take the axe down, but the throwing axe, which almost fell into the trunk, caused the soldier to exhaust all his strength and didn't pull it out. This situation makes these soldiers a little bit quiet. If this axe slashes a person, that axe can't split the person in half? Now let's look at the strong and unspeakable barbarian, especially after seeing the barbarian walk up to the tree, as if to pull the axe off without any effort. These soldiers immediately realized this barbarian, it must not be provoked. "Now Lich, your hand is so cool." Kuema on the side looked at the small throwing axe in Shi Xiong's hand a little enviously. He had been in contact with Shi Xiong for a long time, and Kuema has also learned some spoken words of Dalich. For example, cool, for example, nice, for example, fuck. Although Kuema doesn't understand what these strangely pronounced words mean, he still likes to speak this colloquial language. Shi Xiong looked at his closest brother in this life, shook his head slightly and said, "This hand is not easy to learn. To practice this hand, you must have sufficient arm and wrist strength, so that you only then can the throwing distance and rotation speed of the throwing axe be controlled, and in the end can the axe blade accurately hit the enemy." Seeing Kui Ma's slightly thin body, Shi Xiong shook his head helplessly and said, "You still need to exercise more and eat more, otherwise you will not be able to learn to control the throwing axes precisely because of the strength of your body." But throwing axe is not a difficult task, and this kind of weapon can only have great power when used together. If used by one person, it can only strike a single target. If the number of enemies is large, this kind of single-person throwing axe deterrence will be much reduced. Kui Ma looked forward to, yes, if it is true that the warriors in our tribe each have at least 2 throwing axes, as you just said, then our high tree tribe will not be afraid of any enemies. If this thing is thrown together, that power is really hard to imagine. I was scaring those 2 guys just now. However, although our tribe's warriors have not been equipped with this kind of throwing axe, this day is not far away. After the next furnace of steel is made, we can give it to us. The warriors of the tribe are each equipped with 2 throwing axes. Haha, those 2 guys were terrified by you. Stone Bear and Kuwaman joked in Indian happily outside the tent, while inside the tent, Major Hank and Lieutenant Ferguson were also discussing vigorously. "Sir, are you saying that the barbarian is frightening us? How could the High Tree tribe have so many iron weapons? There are more than 100 warriors and 2 throwing axes for one person. How much steel does it take?" Lieutenant Ferguson was obviously still there, tangled with the terrifying number that Shi Xiong just said. If what the barbarian said is true, let alone there are 20 or so people, even if it doubles, they will not be the opponent of these throwing axes. There are woods all around here, and the power of the muskets will be reduced to the lowest level in the woods, but the barbarians can rely on the obstacles of these trees to successfully approach their team, and then pick them up with axes in the sky. Just after thinking about it, Lieutenant Ferguson felt cold all over, so he would rather deceive himself that the warriors of this tribe don't have so many throwing axes. Major Hank glanced at the young man and said quietly, "Is it important to have a throwing axe? Even if they don't have an iron throwing axe, they are still stone axes, bone spears and bows and arrows, although those things are not as good as iron. Weapons are so powerful, but they can still damage us badly. In this woods, they are the masters, and we do not have the advantage." "Then what shall we do?" Lieutenant Ferguson asked anxiously. As a low-level officer, he valued the safety before him more. His subordinates were in such a dangerous situation, which made Lieutenant Ferguson wish he could lead his team out of this forest right away. "Don't worry, my dear Patrick, the barbarian is warning us and intimidating us." "Warnings and intimidation are only a means. I think he would prefer to cooperate with us, otherwise he would not take salt. Come out." "Patrick, you also saw that table salt. www.wuxiaspa.com. What a beautiful table salt. If we can get the exclusive agent of this table salt, then we will make a fortune." "Sir, their monthly production capacity is only about 30,000 pounds, which is too small. On average, an adult needs about 6 gallons of salt a day." Dran, British unit, 1 gallon equals 1/16 ounce, about 1.77 grams. 6 gallons is about 10 grams, about 0.7 pounds of salt a year. 30,000 pounds is for more than 40,000 people. Ferguson said. "More than 40,000 people? Don't forget how many people are in our British Empire. There are close to 10 million in the mainland alone." "What is more than 40,000 people? What about the population of the colonies controlled by our empire?" "So this market it's very big, but the salt produced by these savages is still too little." A lot. I think this number is just right," Major Hank said with a smile. "Why?" Lieutenant Ferguson was still young, and he naturally didn't understand why his boss said that. "Patrick, let me ask you, if the salt is brought back to China, who do you think can eat such good refined salt?" Major Hank asked. Lieutenant Ferguson guessed a little bit. He hesitated and said, "You mean to those nobles?" "Bingo, my dear Patrick. Do you think those mudlegs in China can afford such good salt? Let alone those mudlegs, even you and me. I am afraid I can't eat such salt." Although Ferguson is very reluctant to admit this, the fact is that it is so cruel. If such a good salt really appears in the British mainland, it is definitely not something that middle and low-level officers like them can afford. This salt can only be those only powerful aristocrats can enjoy it. Chapter 86. Liaison Officer. Those nobles are very extravagant. They use more salt every day than the ordinary people. Ordinary people don't want to use salt, but who cares about those nobles? Therefore, this month's 30,000 pounds of salt is probably not enough for the domestic nobles. "Master, use it," Major Hank said, looking at Lieutenant Ferguson. At the same time, don't forget that these salt are refined salt, which is rarely seen in China. I have known the domestic salt price. Now our largest saltworks in the country, the Dordtwich Saltworks, can produce about 30,000 hundredweight a year. The price of salt from the Dordtwich Saltworks is about 2 shillings per quart. Imperial unit. 1 quart is equal to 28 pounds, or about 12.7 kilograms. That is, a pound of salt is about 0.9. It's about a penny. But don't forget that this is just the ex-factory price. The price of salt on the market is about 1.5 pence a pound, but that kind of salt is the lowest grade salt, not good in color, not good in taste, and contains impurities. The salt here is the top refined salt. If this kind of salt is on the market, even if it sells for 4 pence or higher for a pound, those nobles will break their heads. Lieutenant Ferguson nodded. He still knows this calculation very well, and he also knows that Major Hank's words are not exaggerated. With the luxurious lifestyle of the noble lords in China, this refined salt will definitely make the butlers of these noble lords berserk. If we can get their agency rights, we will use the domestic low-grade salt to purchase the salt. And then as long as it is shipped back to the United Kingdom, I intend to sell it to the noble lords at a price of 5 pence or even 6 pence. They don't care about the money. If they can sell for 6 pence a pound, then 1 pound can only buy about 40 pounds of refined salt, and 30,000 pounds of refined salt can be sold for 750 pounds. And we need to spend it. How much to buy these refined salt? It only costs less than 200 pounds. Even after deducting the transportation costs, we can make more than 500 pounds when we change hands. We can make 6,000 pounds in 1 year. This figure is more than domestic 90% of aristocratic lords. At that time, we can also become aristocratic lords. You said, can we do this business? This number makes Lieutenant Ferguson a little bit wanting to be silly. After swallowing dryly, Lieutenant Ferguson asked in a low voice, "Sir, do you think we can get these refined salt at the price of domestic low-grade salt?" How can it be impossible? Don't forget, they are barbarians. We don't even need to pay. We just need to exchange things for these refined salt, and I think that barbarian will agree. It's just that, we need to bring in that old fellow Jones, and that old fellow won't let this business go. Colonel Jones. Lieutenant Ferguson muttered the name, and at the same time tsk twice, and shook his head. Obviously, he was a bit unwelcome to the highest military officer in Jamestown. "Sir, if Colonel Jones joins in, with that guy's greed, he will definitely let him take away the bulk of this profit." "You're right. So, we need to work together to blind Jones's greedy bitch." "Patrick, I think there must be one person here between the two of us, because only in this way can we be able to conceal the purchase price or exchange price of these refined salt. And we can also talk to fellow Jones, and say that this barbarian tribe appoints who and whom to be the liaison officer, so that we can tell Jones that these refined salt the price is a pound and 4 pence or even more." As soon as Major Hank said this, Lieutenant Ferguson immediately understood what it meant. If the two of them want to get the bulk of the profits, they must conceal the purchase price of these exquisite salt. Otherwise, once Jones knows the purchase price, then almost all the profits will be swallowed by the greedy colonel. Although Lieutenant Ferguson has just arrived in the New World not long ago, He has heard countless people talk about Colonel Jones' greed. And in order to conceal the purchase price of these refined salt, there must be a liaison officer between this tribe and Jamestown, and all trade must go through the hands of this liaison officer. In the past, whether it was Pointons or other Indians, when dealing with European colonists, they used liaison officers or messengers to make deals. "Sir, let me stay. I don't worry about others." Ferguson gritted his teeth and said, "Only the two of them know about this now. Major Hank is absolutely impossible to stay, and even if he wants to stay, Lieutenant Ferguson doesn't plan to do so. After all, in Jamestown, Major Hank's relationship is far away, far more profound than this new ensign of the army. Major Hank is in charge of organizing the transportation of salt in Jamestown and even selling some refined salt in the local area. www.wuxiaspot.com. The effect is far better than himself. Think about the net profit of £6,000 that year. Even if Major Hank and Colonel Jones split the £5,000 and only left £1,000 for himself, that was a huge amount that I would never have imagined before. Wealth. For those pounds, Lieutenant Ferguson really didn't mind staying as a liaison officer. Anyway, my parents are far away in the mainland. Whether I have married and had children, or a bachelor, there is nothing to worry about. It is undoubtedly the best candidate to be this liaison officer." Hearing Ferguson say so, Major Hank nodded in satisfaction. "Patrick, it will be very hard to stay here, so, as your reward, I will give you 20% of the net profit. Don't forget, our key purpose is to conceal the purchase price, so that Jones the old ghost won't get too much profit." 20%. This number was a bit beyond Ferguson's imagination, so he nodded excitedly and agreed. "Patrick, next we need to invite the two barbarians to negotiate about the agency of these refined salt. Remember our bottom line, the price cannot exceed the price of domestic low-grade salt." "Don't worry. I know what to say." Lieutenant Ferguson waved his fist excitedly. The 20% dividend made him very excited. For the dividend of more than £1,000 this year, he was willing to do anything, including act as a liaison officer in this barbarian tribe. The Stone Bear standing outside the tent talking and laughing, when he saw that the curtain of the tent was lifted and Major Hank and Lieutenant Ferguson walked out with a smile, he knew that the incident had not gone away. Chapter 87, He is a Devil. The salt is related to Shi Xiong's future development plan. For Major Hank and Lieutenant Ferguson, it is related to whether they can make a lot of profits and become masters. So when negotiating, it is really called a comparison. The negotiation between them did not go very smoothly. Of course, with some appropriate concessions, Shi Xiong will still allow it. After all, this kind of thing can't make one party eat full of intestinal fat while the other party can only drink northwest wind. Only things in which both parties can get benefits can last long. There is no eternal friendship in this world, only eternal interests. Everyone understands the meaning of this sentence. What? You plan to exchange materials for these table salt? Well, I agree in principle. After all, your pound is useless with us. Since you are willing to exchange materials, I can agree to this. After some fierce negotiations, the final focus of the contradiction was implemented in several aspects. After careful consideration, Shi Xiong made a little concession again. Originally, Shi Xiong used salt to exchange British pounds. That thing is not much better than waste paper here, and it's like wiping your ass. However, this kind of important matter cannot be easily compromised. Only by making a slight concession at the most critical moment can you obtain the benefits you want in other areas. Sure enough, after hearing Shi Xiong agree to this, Major Hank and Lieutenant Ferguson both smiled. You ask them to pay for these salt, and they don't have so many pounds. Dear Guardian, since you promised us that we can exchange materials for these table salt, should we continue to discuss the value of these table salt? Shi Xiong's skill or cunning made Captain Hank realize he was really underestimated this strong barbarian before. On the surface, this guy looked very strong, but inside this strong body, there was an extremely delicate mind. This made Major Hank immediately put away his previous contempt for Stone Bear, and instead opened his mouth to respectfully call him the Guardian Lord. It can also be seen from the change of title that Major Hank has treated Stone Bear as an equal person. Shi Xiong shook his head and said, Major Hank, the price you just mentioned is not kind. 0.5 pence a pound? Do you think I am stupid, or the price you proposed is stupid? Seeing Shi Xiong's sarcasm, Major Hank couldn't help but blush. Shi Xiong didn't seem to see Major Hank's look, and said to himself, as far as I know, the ex-factory price of salt in the Dortwich Saltworks, the largest saltworks in your country, is equivalent to almost 1 penny and 1 pound, and it's expensive. Can the salt produced by the National Salt Factory be compared with mine? The salt we produce is actually not affordable for ordinary people. This kind of salt should usually be placed on the tables of the noble lords in your country. And even if my salt is placed on the banquet table of King George III of your country, it is absolutely qualified. Major Hank, Lieutenant Ferguson, do you agree with what I said? Major Hank was choked with these words. Lieutenant Ferguson took the conversation and said, Respected Guardian, don't forget that we need to pull the salt from here to Jamestown. Shipping from Jamestown to the British mainland is also very expensive. Can you chop off so much for me? Is it possible that you two really think I'm a fool and don't know anything about the outside? Shi Xiong looked at these two playfully. Don't tell me. Don't look. I'm here now, but I probably know more about the European continent than you do. For example, when your King George III was 18 years old, he was rewarded by your last King George II to stay at St. James's Palace, but Prince George at the time did not agree. But your King George III married your Queen Sophia Charlotte in the Royal Auditorium of St. James's Palace. As soon as these words were spoken, both Major Hank and Ensign Ferguson looked like hell. They don't know these rumors, and only a few great nobles can know about these royal secrets. But looking at the barbarian's speaking attitude, he obviously knew these secrets. Shi Xiong certainly knows. As an associate researcher librarian working in a museum in his previous life, he certainly knows some of the most basic history of the West. As the most powerful sunless empire on this planet several hundred years ago, its history is even more of concern to Stone Bear. Major Hank and Lieutenant Ferguson were completely defeated by Stone Bear's remarks, and the two didn't even have the idea of negotiating. This barbarian man is a devil, otherwise, how could he know so much? Seeing that the two people were beaten by himself, Shi Xiong knew that it was time to make concessions, so he said, I will never accept the price of 0.5 pence a pound, but I can accept a penny a pound price. In fact, I know very well that as far as the quality of this salt is concerned, as long as you ship it back to the UK, I believe those noble lords are willing to buy these salt for 4 pence or even higher prices. www.wooksiaspit.com. For those noble lords, they won't take a few pennies in their eyes at all, but this kind of salt can improve their taste a lot. No matter how much you can sell, I'll give you the prices based on a penny and a pound. You can also make a huge profit at this price. Dear Major Hank and Ensign Ferguson, do you know if this price is acceptable to you? Ishikama is very aware of the popularity of this high-energy refined table salt, and he also wants to make this fortune, but no way, he still doesn't have the ability to make this fortune. Apart from other things, Shi Xiong can't solve the problem of sales and logistics. However, the price of 1 penny and 1 pound is enough for the Stone Bear. There are hundreds of sub-clan people working in Zoi and Shan. All the big iron pots in the tribe have been transported. 1 pot of salt can produce 30 or 40 caddies of refined salt. 20 pots are made at the same time. 1,500–600 caddies of salt can be produced in one day, approximately 1,700 pounds. Shi Xiong said that 30,000 pounds a month is an insurance statement. If the people are allowed to let go, they can provide 60,000 pounds a month. But the rice has to be eaten bite by bite, and I can't eat hot buns in a hurry. So now Shi Xiong intends to use 30,000 pounds for the first 2 transactions. As for the cost of refined table salt, apart from labor, it is almost nothing. The most expensive thing is wood. But the mountains and plains here are full of trees, and the most indispensable thing is this stuff. So even if it's a penny and a pound, it's almost a pure profit. Sure enough, as soon as the price was exported, Major Hank and Lieutenant Ferguson, who were still awkward just now, raised their heads in surprise. Chapter 88, A Legendary Figure. Major Hank took the other 18 soldiers away, and Lieutenant Ferguson stayed. Nearly 10,000 pounds of refined salt stuffed Major Hank's 20 horse-drawn carriages. Fortunately, the four-wheeled carriages in Europe have become very popular in this era. This time the carriages brought by these Wasaches are all that a four-wheeled freight wagon with a strong load-bearing capacity, otherwise Major Hank would not be able to pull the 10,000 pounds of refined salt. Although there are less than 10,000 pounds of salt, the goods that Major Hank brought with them did not even have a fifth of the value of the salt. Ironware and cotton cloth accounted for the bulk of these goods. The rest of the goods also contained seeds, burnt glasses of messy colors, and alcohol. If the stone bear did not come to the Gaoshu tribe, then these things are enough to clean up the inventory that the Gaoshu tribe has accumulated for several months. After all, these things are currently the most needed by the Gaoshu tribe's tribe. It's like the kind of iron pot that Major Hank brought to him, which is about the same size as the Liuyan iron pot. Let alone Europe, even in Jamestown, an iron pot is only a few pennies. But if you pull it to the Gaoshu tribe, if you don't have 10 complete skins or 2 bison skins in such an iron pot, you don't want to take it away. But unfortunately, Shi Xiong is here now. Although he doesn't know much about prices in Europe, he also knows some things in general. He knew a lot about the prices of the most important materials such as salt, iron, horses, and grain through history books. Therefore, Major Hank and the others can't cover the stone bear. When Major Hank and Lieutenant Ferguson saw that almost every family in the tribe had iron weapons, and almost everyone in the warriors had an iron weapon in their hands, they knew that the iron tools they brought had completely turned into rubbish. Plus the refined salt the Shi Xiong brought out was really attractive to them, so these goods were almost half for half delivered, and they were all thrown here. Major Hank must vacate all the carriages in order to pull away the precious refined salt. These goods are not even worth 10 pounds in Jamestown. It is definitely a big profit to be able to return so much refined salt. Of course, these goods are only a deposit for the 10,000 pounds of salt. If Major Hank wants to continue trading, if he still wants to completely control this salt sales channel, Shi Xiong is not afraid that he will not come. Before Major Hank left, Stone Bear handed him an animal skin with a few items listed on it. The horse came first. The things listed on this animal skin are the real things exchanged for this batch of table salt and the next batch of table salt. Those tribesmen don't know the tricky inside. After seeing Master Guardian only use the salt produced in these 7 or 8 days, they have exchanged so many things. Each of these tribes enjoys the same as the Green Valley Festival. Even Li Lei stopped speaking after a long time with his mouth open in shock and speechless. What else did you say? Let him. Li Lei go to deal with those Vasaches. Killing him. Li Lei can't do this. But Master Guardian only took a while to save all the things brought by the Vasaches, and the tribe didn't even pay for a piece of fur. This is the gap. Although table salt is more precious, since the Lord Guardian taught the tribes how to make salt, the salt produced in a day in the tribe can be filled with a wooden hut. The salt that was once incomparably precious in the eyes of the tribe has now become a tribe, the least valuable thing in it. Why do you keep this thing? It is easy to be damp and agglomerate. People can't eat more. So much salt is made to exchange things. Not only have to trade with those Vasaches, but also with the tribes of the Cherokee tribe and even the royal court. The most important thing is that with the salt-making craftsmanship, you will never have to look at the stinky faces of the Pamunkey people in the east. The people in the tribe happily searched for their favorite things among the large amount of cargo, and Stone Bear chatted with Lieutenant Ferguson in his wooden house. In fact, when he heard the name Patrick Ferguson for the first time, the Stone Bear almost jumped up. Without him, if the guy in front of you is indeed called by this name, then in terms of his age, this guy might really be the guy who invented the Ferguson rifle for the British Army in history. Speaking of Patrick Ferguson in history, he is a legendary figure. This guy was born in an ordinary family in England, with parents on the top and a younger sister on the bottom. His family is not rich, so as early as when he was 14, he became an ordinary soldier in the Royal British Army. This guy, who was a child at the time, followed the Royal Army of the British Empire to serve in Flanders across the English Channel after joining the army. Flanders was probably located in the western part of Belgium, and extended to the north of France. There are many rich port cities. I'm reading www.youcanchew.com such as Bruges and Ghent. This country was originally an earldom, and the people there spoke a dialect of Dutch called Flemish. The Flandersburg was brilliant in the late Middle Ages and the early Renaissance, mainly because the powerful Burgundy Duchy established its court here. Later, because the Duke of Burgundy was too arrogant and was taken out by the Big Brothers, Flanders gradually began to go downhill. Ferguson stayed here for more than a year, and then joined the army to serve in Germany. After staying in Germany for 2 years, because of his superb marksmanship, the 17-year-old Ferguson followed the Royal Navy of the British Empire to serve in the West Indies on the edge of the Caribbean Sea, where they would fight the French. Until last year, after the French ended the Second Anglo-French War with defeat, Lieutenant Ferguson was sent to Jamestown. When talking to Major Hank and Lieutenant Ferguson for the first time, Major Hank had already told Shi Xiong that this year was the second year after the end of the Second Anglo-French War, which was in 1764 AD, which was different from what Shi Xiong himself had guessed before. The year is about the same. And it was precisely for this reason that Shi Xiong affirmed that the ensign officer who was only 20 years old and had superb marksmanship was the famous Patrick Ferguson in history. In this era, there is no such thing as a sniper, but the soldiers or officers with superb marksmanship in the army are called sniper shooters. And Patrick Ferguson is the famous sharpshooter in Jamestown. In fact, Patrick Ferguson is famous not only because he developed the world's first breech-mounted quick-firing rifle, but also because of his famous unfired shot during the period of independent warfare. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 89, Teach Him. In the original history, Patrick Ferguson returned to China after serving in Jamestown for a period of time, until the situation in the 13 colonies in North America became more and more critical. At that time, Ferguson, who had been promoted to captain, was very familiar with the situation in North America. Once again, he followed the warships of the Royal Navy of the British Empire to North America. As a result, as soon as he arrived in North America, the Solo War started. As a sharpshooter, Captain Ferguson is holding an old-fashioned front-loaded musket, which is the kind of Brown Beth rifle that the British soldiers saw this time. This rifle has been in service in the British Army for a long time, and it is absolutely no problem if it is used against the Indians. But those guys in North America who were fighting alone at the time, they were holding the newly developed Kentucky rifle in their hands, with an effective range of more than 180 meters. In contrast, the old-fashioned front-loaded musket shot by the sharpshooter Captain Ferguson has an effective range of not even 90 meters. The old-fashioned rifle at 90 meters can be used with other new-style rifles. Sure enough, in the famous Battle of Brandywine River, Captain Ferguson was finally injured by a gun. His right arm was injured by an enemy sharpshooter. The injury was quite serious. According to the current situation, if the disability level is divided, it is enough to make Captain Ferguson a disabled person. The wounded Captain Ferguson was very depressed. He clearly had better marksmanship than the opponent, but this gun was really ineffective. Therefore, Captain Ferguson, who has learned his lesson, is ready to develop a new rifle with a longer effective range and faster reloading speed. Of course, his idea attracted unanimous ridicule at the time, because before him, many professional firearms designers tried to design post-loading rifles, but they were unsuccessful. It was either easy to burn the shooter or too much gunpowder residue after shooting affect the next shot. And Ferguson is a complete gun layman, if anyone can believe that he can succeed. But don't see if Captain Ferguson doesn't know how to make guns. but he is an out-and-out gun master. Sharpshooter never blows it out. It is fed with countless bullets. Captain Ferguson, who is familiar with the various advantages and disadvantages of firearms, does not care about the ridicule and distrust of others. Based on his own judgment of firearms, he is persevering in researching new rifles. Not to mention, it is precisely because of Captain Ferguson's unwillingness to give up the research spirit that finally made him develop a breech-firing rifle within 6 months after being injured. The effective range of this rifle is more than 180 meters, which was already the best at the time. The most important thing is that this kind of rifle screen abandoned the front loading, but switched to the rear loading. You need to know that the old-fashioned front-loading shotgun used before has slow ammunition loading and cannot be reloaded in a prone position. It is easy to expose the target when loading ammunition on the battlefield. With the use of post-installation, this problem is completely solved. The most important thing is that the loading speed of this new rifle has reached more than 6 rounds per minute, which is more than double the loading speed of the old front-loading rifle. This is definitely an excellent new rifle. But unfortunately, this new rifle was not promoted in the British Army. Even when Captain Ferguson was holding the new rifle he developed at the Woolwich Arsenal in the UK when it was shown to the top British Army, he used his gun to hit a cow 91 meters away in the eye. Even if this superb shooting technology and the excellent performance of the new gun shocked the senior British Army, they named this rifle Ferguson Rifle on the spot and decided to immediately produce 100 Ferguson rifles, and also promoted Ferguson to major and appointed him, form and command a special force using Ferguson rifles. This still did not allow the Ferguson rifle to be promoted in the British Army. The benefits involved in a new rifle are too great. How can those conservative weapon manufacturers let a captain with no background, oh no, is the major to the cake that originally belonged to them? Therefore, even when Major Ferguson returned to the North American continent again, continued to participate in the war alone, and was unfortunately killed in the Battle of Kings Mountain, his Ferguson rifle was not promoted. This has to be said to be a kind of sadness. However, Major Ferguson and his Ferguson rifle, who died at the age of only 36, still left a strong mark in history, especially in the Battle of Germantown in 1777, when Major Ferguson and his special forces were surrounded by the U.S. Army. But with the excellent command and the strength of the Ferguson rifle can be loaded when lying down. The special forces easily broke out of the encirclement of the U.S. Army. And when Major Ferguson led his men to break through, he saw a U.S. military officer riding a war horse turning away on the edge of the battlefield. In fact, at the first glance of the U.S. military officer, Major Ferguson recognized that the U.S. military officer was George Watson. www.wuxiaspot.com. At that time, George Watson was only one distance away from Major Ferguson, more than 100 meters. With Major Ferguson's marksmanship and the power of a new rifle, as long as Major Ferguson shoots, then the founding father of the United States will be completely destroyed and the entire history of North America will be completely changed. But Major Ferguson is a real gentleman. Even if it is an enemy, he is unwilling to shoot from behind. So George Watson escaped by luck. This is the famous unfired shot in history. Patrick Ferguson in the original historical time and space is really a legendary figure, but the little fresh meat in front of him is not as powerful as the original historical time and space. So, after learning that this guy is the Patrick Ferguson, Shi Xiong's heart could not suppress a very evil idea to train him. Even if Ferguson had been in the army for 6 years, he was still only a 20-year-old young man. If he did not meet the stone bear, perhaps he would still develop a powerful Ferguson rifle in the future, and he would still be in King Mountain. During the battle, the sharpshooter of the U.S. Army sniped and killed him at a distance of 450 yards. But now Shi Xiong is here, and he is lucky enough to meet Patrick Ferguson when he was young. Then in the future, in which direction he will develop and what height he will develop, it's hard to say. Anyway, Shi Xiong looks at this pink and tender Mr. Ferguson. The evil thoughts in his heart are really getting more and more vigorous. So much so that he squeezed a smile that made Lieutenant Ferguson shudder, and in a tone that was even more frightening, He said something that Lieutenant Ferguson would never even think of. Chapter 90, Mix with Me. Lieutenant Ferguson really couldn't understand why this thick-looking and strong-looking guardian had a heart that was completely different from his appearance. Or thought ... If you just look at the appearance, when you first see this guardian lord, you will be surprised by his strong physique. Such a burly and strong physique is really rare, at least in the memory of Lieutenant Ferguson. He had never seen such a strong man. A guy with such a physique usually makes people feel a sense of subconscious fear, but if you get in touch with the guardian for a while, you will find that this looking fierce guy is actually very easy to get along with. Although he looks intimidating, he is actually very interesting to talk about, and he has a great demeanor. At the very least, among all the people that Lieutenant Ferguson knew, he couldn't remember anyone who could compare to this big guy in terms of talking and deportment. Had it not been for this big man to be a true New World barbarian, Lieutenant Ferguson would really have thought that this guy was actually an English nobleman. It's actually a pleasure to talk to someone who looks fierce but feels comfortable to touch, especially since the guardian still knows so many weird things. Although Lieutenant Ferguson doesn't know about this big one, whether the things he said were true or not, but depending on the stance he was talking about, Lieutenant Ferguson thought he was not talking nonsense. But if you get in touch with this big man again, then you will find that this big man is far more than just superficial and feels as good as the first contact. Is not to say how vicious this big man is, nor how hypocritical this big man is. It is true that the more contact with this big man, the more and more Lieutenant Ferguson can feel the other side of this big man's hiding. How do you say it? After getting in touch with this big man, you can easily feel that tall man's posture. That's right, although he has never shown such a high-level posture, but this high-level posture is unconsciously revealed all the time. For example, of course, when talking about things between European countries, he faintly showed the kind of carelessness, as if he was a high god, overlooking the countries below. And when he talks about the people's livelihood of various countries, he will also inadvertently show a very high posture, as if an emperor is talking about his subjects. As for the gunpowder, steel making, salt making, gun making, these businesses that can make a fortune as long as you master any one of them, he said it like a stone thrown on the side of the road. He didn't care. If he was pretending to be a posture, Lieutenant Ferguson didn't think it looked like it. Let's take steel making as an example. Ferguson had never heard of the terms high carbon steel, medium carbon steel, coke steel making, and blast furnace iron making from his mouth. However, this big man said it very well, and every sentence sounded very reasonable. The most important thing is that this guy has an excellent quality steel knife in his hand. In his words, this steel knife is made of steel he personally made. Lieutenant Ferguson doesn't know how to make steel, but he can see how good this knife is. This is really a good knife, absolutely a good knife, which Lieutenant Ferguson dares to use his head as a guarantee. At least he had never seen such a good knife. This is definitely a treasure that every soldier hopes to have. Therefore, Lieutenant Ferguson believes that the Guardian is definitely a very, very talented barbarian. No, a person with such an outstanding talent should not be called a barbarian. He is a guardian, guarding his tribe and the priestess who doesn't look very good. Second, Lieutenant Ferguson bet that an outstanding person like the Guardian, even if he is a barbarian tribe from the New World, if he stood in front of the great king of the British Empire, he would definitely be better than the nobles who knew how to brag about patting horses 100 times. It's just that you are so talented, but you still have to say those things to seduce us. Formal? We are just a small ensign, let alone the British mainland. Even in Jamestown, there are dozens of ensign officers. Lieutenant Ferguson, who escaped from the cabin where the Guardian lived in embarrassment to his cabin, really didn't understand why the Guardian said so many heart-stirring words. Lieutenant Ferguson understands his identity very well. As a second lieutenant officer of the Royal British Empire, although the official position is not high and the power is not high, he also swore to the national flag to be loyal to His Majesty the King in his life. But why the words of the Guardian somehow made his mind almost uncontrollable. It's not easy to get rich. Follow me. It's not that I told you. You just need to follow me with all your heart. I promise you will earn more than £10,000 a year in net profit. What Major Hank is doing now counts. Fart. Isn't it just refined table salt, Patrick? If you follow me, I will immediately give you how to make refined table salt. Besides, I'll give you how to make high-strength new steel, and what else? Make more powerful gunpowder. These things are nothing to me. But as long as you master one of them, I guarantee you will become the richest man in the UK within 3 years. Not to mention that there are even more awesome businesses here. The means. People die for money. www.wuxiaspa.com. Birds die for food. Wealth is touching. Lieutenant Ferguson admitted that he was a little tempted by the promise of becoming the richest man in Britain. What? Do you like guns? TSK. Look at the broken gun in your hand. You can't even hit the target at a distance of 100 meters. Why do you want this kind of broken gun? As long as you are willing to follow me, I can point you to a new rifle with a longer range and faster loading speed. I can even point you to a more powerful continuous fire rifle. The lure of the new rifle, the charm of the young Lieutenant Ferguson is more tempting than Kaibo. Oh, you don't have a girlfriend yet? TSK. Such a handsome blonde boy, and a second lieutenant officer, without a girlfriend? It's really unreasonable. Let's go. As long as you are willing to follow me, I will keep you. All kinds of girlfriends. Fat, thin, tall, short, blonde, chestnut-haired, pure, mature. As long as you want, I guarantee a lot women follow you. How about, follow your brother? If it were not for Lieutenant Ferguson to remember his vows when he enlisted in the army, he might have really succumbed to these seductive and deceptive words. Lieutenant Ferguson, who fled to his cabin in a panic, could still clearly notice the uncontrollable beating of his heart, and the words of Master Guardian could not go away anyway. He's really a devil. Lieutenant Ferguson, who was lying on the wooden bed, looked at the roof blankly, and muttered in his heart. P.S. I would like to bow to thank you for the reward of the earth is my round 100. Chapter 91. Bridge. There is a blonde Vasiku in the tribe, which makes the people very curious. For Waxiku, although the people of Gaoshu tribe had seen it many times, it was the first time they had had such close contact. Especially this Vasiku combed his hair meticulously every day. He wore the red shrimp uniform. This dress made the tribesmen in the tribe, especially the children, more interested. So, in the first few days that Lieutenant Ferguson stayed, he was the giant panda in the tribe. However, this guy Ferguson is indeed a gentleman. Even if he is so powerfully onlookers, he still doesn't think it's disgusting. He smiles every day and greets everyone he sees enthusiastically, whether it's children or women and children. In this way, although the words are unreasonable, the sincere demeanor can indeed be felt by the people of the tribe. Therefore, in a few days, Lieutenant Ferguson completely changed from a giant panda to a bison that is the most common among the tribe. That's right, Lieutenant Ferguson used his natural affinity to get along with the clansmen of the Gaoshu tribe in just a few days. Even because this guy wore his red army uniform coat all day long because he was so embarrassed. In fact, Ferguson had no other clothes to change and wash. The tribe even gave him a nickname, Da Hong. When Rabbit Mouth told Shi Xiong the nickname, Shi Xiong laughed so much that his stomach hurts. However, Shi Xiong is still very happy that this guy can get along with the people so quickly. This little brother is worth cultivating. Although this guy is 4 years older than himself, when Shi Xiong's innermost thoughts of training celebrities burst out, he can no longer hold back. So, Shi Xiong really doesn't mind letting himself, the Vasiku little brother, see how he makes steel, how to make coke, how to make salt. Of course, this is also directly related to Lieutenant Ferguson's sincere swear that I will never leak everything I see. This shows that this little brother is very knowledgeable and very gentlemanly. Not to mention, Shi Xiong doesn't believe that this guy will really spread these skills. After all, this guy will not even shoot at Mr. Watsonton who is facing him on the battlefield. This is enough to prove that he really is very gentleman. Gentlemen of this year are not like the so-called gentlemen of later generations who sell dog meat. Gentlemen of this era really have their own gentleman standards, and they can even use their own blood and lives to maintain this gentleman standards. In fact, even if it is a 10,000 step back, what happened to Ferguson's passing of these technologies in the future? These things are nothing to Shi Xiong, even if they are spread out. Huaxia proposed a well-known military theory more than 2,000 years ago, called distant diplomatic and close attack. Shi Xiong very much agrees with this theory. Therefore, in the plan that Shi Xiong has carefully considered for a long time, the British in the future will not be regarded as his own enemies. At best they can be regarded as objects of limited cooperation. Don't look at the current British fleet, but after all, the British mainland is separated from the North American continent by an Atlantic Ocean, and no matter how awesome the fleet is, you can't expect the fleet to go to the land and play awesome, right? As for the British Army, it doesn't matter that. In the future, the biggest enemy of the Stone Bear and its people is not from Europe, but from Wasiku, who now lives in the 13 colonies. Regardless of the fact that the later generations of America are very strong, but from now until the end of the 18th century, in the 40 years, the Wasiku living in the 13 colonies was not strong, even if they won. The United States was established by war alone, and the same is true. As the saying goes, will you kill you when you are sick? The Stone Bear is not a virgin bitch. So if you don't take advantage of the weakest time in the United States, should you wait until this rogue country becomes stronger? Shi Xiong is not a fool. Therefore, after the United States alone, the British will not be regarded as enemies. Moreover, some technologies were selectively leaked to the British high level through Lieutenant Ferguson, so that the British Army could increase a little more strength, thereby minimizing the geographical disadvantages brought by the Atlantic Ocean to the British. Give more blood to both parties. The most critical reason is that if Shi Xiong wants to develop the Gaoshu tribe in a short period of time, and then advance to the central and western regions, the southern region and the Great Lakes region, it cannot do without the resources and manpower of the European continent. Stand by. Ishikama does not think that such a feat can be accomplished by himself alone. A fence in 3 piles, a hero needs 3 people to help. It is undeniable that the indigenous people living in the North American continent are so backward that they can't operate some slightly more advanced things, let alone develop those more advanced things. Without human resources, it is equivalent to a building without a foundation. The loft in the sky has always been something that exists in fantasy. Therefore, Shi Xiong now needs resources from Europe, especially human resources. Shi Xiong's mind is full of countless technologies from the era of the Big Bang of previous technologies. I'm reading www. Anythingoutofukenshu.com is enough to change the current social situation, but again, those technologies are accumulated little by little from the most basic science. For example, Shi Xiong knows the formula and preparation method of smokeless gunpowder, but now you let a group of Indians help you prepare smokeless gunpowder? That's not a joke. Except for the 13 colonies on the entire North American continent, those Indian compatriots can't even make the most basic nitric acid and sulfuric acid. Do you still expect them to make nitrocellulose, then add nitrocellulose and diphenylamine to soak ether, and finally get smokeless gunpowder? This is even more difficult than letting the Gaoshu tribe unify the entire Cherokee tribe in 1 year. In Europe, at least the conditions for making smokeless gunpowder are available, and even those for the preparation of strong drugs are available. What Europeans lack now is only technology. Just like at this time in 1764, Europeans have already produced bitter sour. It's a pity that in this era, Europeans only use picric acid for dyes. They don't even know that once this thing has been in contact with metal for a long time, it can become a potent drug that is several times more powerful than TNT. So, Shi Xiong really doesn't care about these technologies. What he cares most about now is how to find more down and out scientists from Europe, and get more necessary raw materials and tools from Europe. Without these, all dreams are just a dream, which can never be realized. Stone Bear urgently needs a bridge that can connect the Gaoshu tribe in the European continent. Now whether it is Major Hank or Lieutenant Ferguson, who is dangling in front of him all day. All have the conditions to become this bridge. Chapter 92. Tune the road slowly and farther away. Those refined table salt you made was obtained from here? Lieutenant Ferguson asked with a constipated expression, looking at the small salt mountain in front of him. The weather on this day was fine, and it was a rare warm day, so Shi Xiong took Lieutenant Ferguson to the oil mountain. Since this guy showed curiosity about salt making, Shi Xiong didn't mind showing him how the exquisite table salt was made. Lieutenant Ferguson was shocked when he saw the hot and lively scene under the oil mountain. He even dipped his hand in the rock salt he had just chiseled off and licked it. As a result, his bitter face changed drastically. But his complexion hasn't returned to normal, and he saw the refined salt just boiled over there, so his complexion has become so wonderful. Lieutenant Ferguson had seen this kind of toxic rock salt, but he couldn't figure it out anyway, why these toxic rock salt could eventually become that kind of exquisite maddening table salt. Do you want to learn? Tell me if you want to learn. I will teach you. Then you can follow my method to make salt after you return to the British mainland. I promise you will be the richest man in the UK within 3 years. This is not a bullshit. The salt stuff, especially the refined salt that sells well, if it can be made in the UK, then the profits can definitely drive any great nobleman crazy. Even if Ferguson finds a powerful nobleman to partner in this kind of business, he will definitely become a rich man in a famous town within 3 years. Ferguson rolled his eyes and said, "You are not my brother, you are 4 years younger than me." Shi Xiong shrugged his shoulders indifferently and said, "The expert is brother." Lieutenant Ferguson rolled his eyes again, and turned off the topic directly. "I still don't learn this stuff, and learning it is of no use to me. My interest is not in this respect." "Really, not studying?" Shi Xiong tilted his head and looked at Lieutenant Ferguson, who was more than half a head shorter than himself. "It's okay, you don't have to worry about money and other expenses. You just need to call me brother or boss, and I will pay you. Learn how to make salt." Lieutenant Ferguson turned around and left. He really doesn't understand why this big guy always wants to call himself his brother or the boss, and he is obviously better than him. If he calls his brother, he has to call his own brother. Shi Xiong laughed, not thinking about it, and chanting loudly, "Tune the road slowly and slowly, I will search for it up and down, ha 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 ha." Whether it is Lieutenant Ferguson or the people of the tribe, they don't know what language this big guy said in what language. How could they understand the old saying that Shi Xiong said in Chinese at this time? Shi Xiong had to admit that this guy Ferguson is indeed a very assertive person. In the face of something like salt making that can generate such a huge benefit, this guy refused to bow his head. Does he really not know that just by calling the insignificant brother or boss, he will be able to learn the salt production method that can easily bring him tens of thousands of pounds in a year? This guy must know, and he must have been shaken, but he was able to control his inner desires afterwards. Hope. As expected, he is the person I see in the official Shi Xiong. At this moment, Shi Xiong is really a little bit. I admire this young ensign Ferguson. The two rode horses to the tribe together, and the stone bear asked on the way, "Patrick, are the rifle barrels you use now still made in the way of casting?" Lieutenant Ferguson nodded, but his interest has obviously improved a lot. As long as it is about firearms, he is very interested. "Then what do you think of the power of the rifle you are using now?" "Well, I mean the range and penetration. The penetration power of the standard rifle we use right now is not bad. After all, the caliber of the rifle we use has reached 7.5 inches, and the projectiles fired are heavy, so the lethality is still very good. The effective range is shorter." Lieutenant Ferguson looked a little embarrassed. "Then have you thought about adding rifling to the barrel? This will increase the effective range." Lieutenant Ferguson nodded first, then shook his head and said, "Rifling is a good thing, and it has been around for a long time, but the processing technology of rifling is really too difficult. It can only be made by hand, and the output is too low, not suitable for large-scale equipment." After a pause, he continued, "I once suggested that my officer build a small number of rifled guns for soldiers with excellent marksmanship, but the officer refused." "Then you can rifle?" Shi Xiong asked. Lieutenant Ferguson nodded. Rifling is not a simple thing, but I will do it. Now in the colony, many immigrants from the old world will use simple wooden machinery to rifle. www.wuxiaspa.com, especially those immigrants from Germany. Many of the jig guns they use are rifled. Now some hunters in Pennsylvania also use this method of making jig guns to create themselves with a long spear. It is said that the effective range is very good. Shi Xiong nodded silently. The Jaeger gun referred to by Lieutenant Ferguson is a technique brought over from German immigrants and used for hunting and self-defense. Hunters in Pennsylvania mostly use this technique to make guns, so the rifle made with this technique is called the Pennsylvania pike. Later, this long gun spread to Kentucky, where hunters improved the gun. The caliber was reduced to 500 caliber, the barrel was lengthened, and the was added. The warhead was also covered with grease-soaked leather or cotton cloth. I loaded the front chamber, so this rifle became the famous Kentucky rifle. Shi Xiong is also very clear that in the original historical time and space, the Ferguson ensign next to him was injured by this rifle with an effective range of 180 meters. After learning from the pain, he developed the Ferguson rifle. But fate reincarnation. Lieutenant Ferguson did not escape the fate of the Kentucky rifle after all, because he was killed by this kind of Kentucky rifle in the end. Go. I will teach you to make a rifle that can be reloaded. If this gun is equipped with a rifled barrel, not only will it be loaded much faster, but the effective range will be more than twice that of the standard rifle you are using now, Shi Xiong said lightly, quite suspicious of pretending to be forced. Really? Do you really have this kind of rifle manufacturing method? Ferguson was excited. Of course, as long as you are willing to call me brother or boss, I will give you what to do immediately. Lieutenant Ferguson immediately fell into entanglement. Chapter 93, Cast Barrel. Shi Xiong likes to watch Ferguson, this arrogant little fresh meat, show such entanglement. Compared to the painful entanglement that caused this guy, Shi Xiong didn't care much about whether he called himself brother or boss. Can make this arrogant guy so entangled, it shows that he is tempted, really tempted. Otherwise this guy will definitely behave like Zioyan Shan just now, turning his head and leaving. It is so rude to refuse things that people are not interested in. Zioyan Shan is not far from the tribe, and Lieutenant Ferguson returned to the tribe while entangled all the way. But this guy still didn't seem to make up his mind to call boss, so he just followed Shi Xiong silently. Ishikama really wanted to poke this guy's thinking. This guy can develop a Ferguson rifle that is at least 30 years ahead of this era in the next 10 years, which is enough to show his talent in firearms. In fact, Lieutenant Ferguson, who has served in Flanders and Germany, has seen rifles from many countries. It is for this reason that he can concentrate the advantages of rifles in various countries and finally created the Ferguson rifle. Although that rifle was eventually not promoted for this and other reasons, it is undeniable that the breech flintlock created by this guy is definitely a gun that is always worth remembering in the history of human firearms, because it is a human being. For the first time in history, after loading guns were used. Back to the tribe. Koima, hard bones and rabbit mouths all surrounded. Shi Xiong asked the rabbit mouth to call the wood planer, and he was going to try to cast a barrel for the first gun in his life today. To be honest, Shi Xiong has never touched a firearm in his previous life or in this life. Even though he was very interested in firearms in his previous life, as a law-abiding honest person, he can only look at the high definition on the computer screen every day. Firearms wallpapered ruling. If I met Ferguson, Stone Bear would never touch a gun. Compared with the work of steel making and salt making, casting gun barrels can only be a dream for Shi Xiong. The barrel is not ordinary, no matter in any era. The steel and technology used in the barrel are the most cutting-edge things in future generations, despite the fact that there are so many kinds of firearms. In fact, few countries can master the technology of gun barrel manufacturing. This thing is not like steel making or salt making. If steel making is not good, the big deal is to make a furnace of molten iron into pig iron. Just like the last time Ishikama made steel, the salt is not well prepared, and the salt produced cannot be eaten. But the barrel of this gun is different. Once this thing is made, It must be installed on the gun. If the quality of the barrel is not good enough, once it is filled with gunpowder to fire a projectile, it can be fatal. So before Lieutenant Ferguson arrived, even if Shi Xiong really wanted to try to make a gun by himself, he never took action. Now that Lieutenant Ferguson is here, with this guy who has a deep knowledge of firearms, Shi Xiong dares to make guns by himself. Whether the made barrel will work, no need to use human life to try. With his eyes and hands, Lieutenant Ferguson can definitely judge the quality of the barrel. This guy has such an ability. Not to mention that the barrels of later generations are made of various special alloy steels. But in this era, when steel can only be made from graphite crucibles, the barrels used by armies of all countries are still cast from wrought iron or even pig iron. Yes, in this era, rifle barrels in many European countries are made by casting. In the past, a blacksmith used wrought iron to heat the barrel while forging it with a hammer while rolling it up to form a barrel. However, this method was too inefficient, so later casting methods gradually replaced this manual method. Although casting barrels is absolutely impractical in later generations, in this era when guns were loaded with guns before, because the interval between every two guns was very long, and most of them used sub-caliber ammunition. Plus this era, the propellant of the gunpowder is black powder, and the explosive power is far lower than that of smokeless powder. Therefore, even if the barrels of this era are exploded, there are not many. Cast barrel is enough. If smokeless gunpowder appears in this era, and then you use this barrel made of wrought iron or pig iron, then 10 guns will definitely explode 10 times. Ishikama intends to use medium carbon steel to cast his barrel for the first time. Thanks to the batch of medium carbon steel that was fried in a kaolin clay crucible for the first time, Ishikama and Muko are now very sure about making a pot of medium carbon steel. Although medium carbon steel is not the best material for casting gun barrels, it is many times stronger than wrought iron or even pig iron. Like those special steels used to make gun barrels in later generations, even the most common 40 Cr steel, Shi Xiong is still unable to come out anyway. Not to mention the quenching process, Ishikama has no idea. Although he knew there were water quenching, oil quenching, low temperature tempering, medium temperature tempering, and high temperature tempering, he really didn't understand how to do it. There are also techniques like those used when making barrels, whether it is drilling or precision cold forging. www.wuxiaspa.com. Now Ishikama can't get it. So, let's honestly use the method of casting to make the first barrel of your life. What is this? Can steel be made with this? Omega. Doesn't this kind of clay pot burn? Christ that Jesus, I am not mistaken. Why don't you use sand to make molds? Can this clay withstand the high temperature of molten iron? Lieutenant Ferguson, who had been standing aside watching the stone bearers and their busy schedule, finally couldn't hold back anymore, and began to transform into a curious baby. His mouth became a Gatling machine gun, and one question after another kept coming from his mouth. Pop out. At first Shi Xiong explained it, but then he didn't bother to explain it. If you explain everything to this guy, then you don't need to do anything today. Before starting a fire, the mold needs to be made. In order to make the inside and outside of the barrel smoother and minimize the presence of sand holes, Ishikama and the wood planer carefully prepared a kaolin clay mold. The melting point of kaolin is close to 1800 Baidu, and the temperature of molten steel cannot destroy the kaolin mold. In addition, kaolin is much more delicate than sand, so the roughness of the barrel produced in this way is far lower than that of the barrel cast by sand mold. This mold is more difficult to make. A few people are busy working together until noon to fix it. In order to prevent the chamber from exploding, Shi Xiong deliberately thickened this part of the gunpowder chamber when making the mold, so that after the barrel is cast, the part of the gunpowder chamber will be thicker than other parts. After all, most of the blasting occurred in the gunpowder chamber, and that part was the place where the gun was subjected to the greatest force. The mold is made, and the next step is steel making. Chapter 94, Rotary locking mechanism. Ferguson watched the smashed pig iron slowly melt into yellow-white iron in this big pot made of mud. The expression on his face was wonderful. "That's okay, Omega. Such a clay pot can melt the broken iron, Master Guardian. Did you use any magic?" Shi Xiong glanced at Ferguson, and said gently, "Call the boss, and I will tell you how to do it." Lieutenant Ferguson stopped speaking immediately. Then, Lieutenant Ferguson saw that the molten iron was scooped out and poured into the mold that had been heated, and Lieutenant Ferguson's heart was the next words. "Patrick, do you know how to make steel? Don't underestimate this pot of molten steel. After it cools, this is a better material steel. In the future, if you want to make a rifle with a longer range and greater power, cast the barrel. This is the skill you must master. After all, the barrel is the core of a gun. Without a good quality barrel, a powerful and long-range rifle can only be a fantasy." While talking, after the mold was poured, there was still a lot of molten steel in the crucible, so Shi Xiong was about to let the remaining molten steel cool naturally. Lieutenant Ferguson looked constipated. Although he saw the whole process of steel making, he did not understand some of the key details. "If you really cast the barrel by yourself in the future, you can't bother the Guardian every time." But when I thought of the words the Guardian said just now, the constipation expression on Lieutenant Ferguson's face became much heavier. The next day, the barrel that had been completely cooled and the steel lump formed by the cooling of the remaining liquid steel were all removed. Shi Xiong took a piece of pig iron and ground the steel tuft, revealing the color of the steel tuft itself. It really is the kind of clean silvery white. This color already shows that it is a good piece of steel. Shi Xiong smashed a few more times with a hammer, and found that the toughness of this steel tuft was also very good, so he was completely relieved. The barrel was made in one pot with this piece of steel. Even if this barrel is an absolutely unqualified barrel in later generations, it is definitely the top barrel in this age. Sure enough, when the mold was smashed open, a steel pipe with a length of 1 meter and a diameter of about 16 millimeters appeared in front of everyone. Ishikama took a glance with his eyes and found that the barrel of the gun was still very straight, although there are no tools such as a level when making the mold. But the dumb person has a dumb method. The simplest method of hanging wire is used, and its flatness is not worse than that measured with a level. When Ishikama was making the mold, whether it was the outer mold or the kaolin mold in the center of the barrel, they were all made of several hanging wires, and the flatness was naturally guaranteed. Passed the barrel of the gun to Ferguson, who was probably thinking about the barrel last night, so this morning his eyes looked red and dark circles appeared. However, this guy's spirit still looks very good, especially after taking over the barrel. He looked at it carefully for a long time, then knocked on the barrel with another piece of iron, and said after listening to the sound, "Guardian sir, this is indeed a very, very good barrel. At least I didn't see any defects in this barrel, and I can determine that this barrel is better than the barrel of the gun on my body." "Many." "You sure?" "I am sure." Lieutenant Ferguson's affirmative tone caused Shi Xiong to put a big rock in his heart. "Okay, since you're sure that this barrel can be used, let's talk about the design of the whole gun next. Let's go back to the room and say, it's a bit cold here." Lieutenant Ferguson hugged the barrel tightly and followed the stone bear back to his room. "Patrick, I want to ask you, do you have any thoughts on the gun that is about to be made? I must say how you can increase the range?" Ferguson thought for a while and said, "If you want to increase the range of a rifle, you must draw a rifling in the barrel. Only a gun with a rifling can make the range longer. You said this yesterday morning." Now I'm thinking about the post-installation method you mentioned yesterday. I think that if the post-installation method you mentioned can be achieved, it will definitely have a huge benefit for improving the loading speed of the soldiers. It's just that I haven't thought of it yet, how to carry out after-loading, because if you want to use the after-loading method, you must open the gunpowder room, so that the airtightness of the gunpowder room cannot be guaranteed. Although the filling speed can be increased, the power of the gunpowder is caused by the inability to seal the gunpowder room lower. It will reduce the power of this gun a lot, and may not even be as good as the standard rifle I use now. Hearing this, Shi Xiong was delighted. He really deserves to be the guy he likes, even if he is only 20 years old now, but after his own suggestions, he can already think of the pros and cons of the post-installation method. I'm reading www.youcanchew.com. So Shi Xiong smiled slightly and said, "What if you use the rotary valve locking method?" How to lock the rotary valve? Lieutenant Ferguson was stunned, and then stood there motionless, as if the words of the stone bear were a spell of petrification magic, and Ferguson was petrified in an instant. Shi Xiong felt happy again. This guy is really a capable person who will develop the Ferguson rifle in the future. He just mentioned the most crucial link in the TIF Ferguson rifle, which brought this guy into a state of epidemic. In fact, the Ferguson rifle is no different from the Kentucky rifle except for the rear loading method. They are all fired rifled guns. However, it is precisely because of the addition of a post-installation method that this rifle has become a rifle of great historical and practical significance. Now all the rifles used in various countries are front-loaded guns, that is, the ammunition is loaded from the muzzle, and the entire barrel is airtight except for the muzzle. The Ferguson rifle has a round hole at the back of the barrel, which is the part of the gunpowder chamber, so that when the bullet is loaded, the projectile and gunpowder can be directly sent into the gunpowder chamber from this hole. Of course, if a hole is opened in the gunpowder chamber, if it is not blocked, the expanding air generated after the gunpowder ignites will inevitably pour out from this hole, and it is impossible to push the projectile out of the barrel at all. Therefore, how to close the loading hole after loading the ammunition has become a big problem. However, Lieutenant Ferguson solved this problem more than 10 years later, allowing a real breech flintlock to appear in the world. And the key to his solution to the locking problem lies in the locking mechanism that can rotate. P.S. Boat to thank a fatty man in Inner Mongolia for the reward of 100. Chapter 95, finally called The Boss. The Ferguson rifle in the original historical time and space is a very creative rifle. Patrick Ferguson, then captain of the British Royal Army, in order to solve the problem of rear-loading rifle locking, ingeniously adopted a rotating locking mechanism, which completely solved the problem of the sealing of the rear-loading gunpowder chamber. This kind of locking method is similar to the locking of the rotary valve of the faucet. At that time, Captain Ferguson opened a round hole in the rear of the gun, which is the upper part of the gunpowder chamber, and then installed a threaded locking rotary valve on the round hole. The locking rotary valve is integrated with the trigger guard below. When using, first turn the trigger guard a circle, so that you can open the locking rotary valve to expose the rear gun chamber, load the spherical projectile, and then load the bulk granular black powder, so that the filling work is completed. After loading the ammunition, turn the trigger guard one turn upside down, so that locking the rotary valve can completely close the barrel. Of course, after all this work is done, fine-grained black powder must be put into the ignition pool as the ignition powder, so that when the flint is excited, the sparks produced can ignite the gunpowder in the ignition pool, and finally ignite the gun. The gunpowder in the chamber completes an excitation process. This kind of rotatable locking mechanism is the key to the Ferguson rifle. It is precisely because of the locking mechanism that can rotate to open and close, the afterloading of ammunition can be realized. But this gun is not without its shortcomings. One of the biggest shortcomings comes from this rotating locking mechanism. The Ferguson rifle uses a threaded vertical rotary valve to lock. This kind of genius design at the time has a good air-holding effect, but the shortcomings are also obvious. This is because prolonged shooting will cause gunpowder residues to be blocked between the teeth of the locking threaded column and the threaded hole, which will make it difficult to lock the thread or fail to leak air. In addition, this rifle has another shortcoming, that is, the fire hole of the ignition pool is located on the right side of the bottom of the barrel, near the closed end of the barrel. In order to transmit the fire effectively, the gunpowder close to the fire hole can only be ignited in bulk, and it cannot be compacted effectively. In contrast, although those front-loaded guns first pour gunpowder pellets from the muzzle and then load the projectiles, the gunpowder can be compacted with cleaning rods at the end. Therefore, although the Ferguson rifle was an epoch-making rifle at the time, it actually had some flaws. But even if there were defects, this gun was already the top rifle at the time. In fact, there is no gun in this world that can guarantee 100% defect-free. Even those carefully crafted rifles of later generations also have such defects. Ishikama wanted to make a burst rifle or even a machine gun, but that was absolutely unrealistic, even if it was the minor rifle that was made by the protagonist Goldfinger that he saw in various overhead historical novels in his previous life. Now the Gaoshu tribe does not have that kind of conditions. There are no available talents in the tribe. Now that he has finally caught a Ferguson ensign, Stone Bear naturally wants to inspire him to get the Ferguson rifle first. As for whether he should continue to inspire him to get out the minor rifle in the future, it depends on the situation. Lieutenant Ferguson stood there holding the barrel so motionless, the expression on his face changed quickly. Seeing this situation, Shi Xiong knew that this guy was at a critical moment, so he ordered them to spread out a little bit, guard around the house, and don't let the clansmen come in and disturb this critical moment of degeneration. British military officer. Shi Xiong will naturally not leave. He wants to witness the degeneration of this guy with his own eyes. This is the middle of the morning, until almost noon. Lieutenant Ferguson, who had been standing still, let out a sigh of relief as if waking up from a big dream. Obviously, after hard thinking, this guy finally realized something. How are you thinking? Did you think of how to post-install? Shi Xiong looked at Lieutenant Ferguson with a smile. Lieutenant Ferguson looked at Shi Xiong with a complex expression, opened his mouth to say something, but in the end he lowered his head with a sigh. Shi Xiong smiled carelessly. Haha, looking at your appearance, obviously I have come up with some methods under my inspiration. How about, I said that I can inspire you to develop better guns and do it. Well, ordinary bosses do this. At the end of the day, Shi Xiong added such a word in an as. Hearing this, Ferguson raised his head and his face changed several times before he bit his cheek and said, Boss, this time I really thank you. Your inspiration really made me think of a kind of the method that can solve the air leakage of the gun at the same time after loading. That is to rotate the locking mechanism. After so long, this guy was finally willing to call boss, although he was still so reluctant, but this was the first time this guy took the initiative to call himself the boss, which made Shi Xiong a little bit old-fashioned. The comfort. Well, now that you have come up with a way, let the ideas in your mind come true. I don't know if you paid attention, I have already cast an eye for you in the gunpowder chamber of this barrel. What I did was figure out how to block this eye. You have gotten out the eye for loading ammunition? Hearing Shi Xiong's words www.wuxiaspot.com, Ferguson quickly turned the barrel upside down and carefully observed the thickened part of the barrel. A circular hole about 0.8 inches in diameter was seen there. Just now, he patronized the overall quality of the barrel and whether the barrel was straight. He didn't notice that this part had quietly opened an eye. Patrick, this eye is cast according to the caliber of the projectile you are using now, and the caliber of the barrel is also made according to the caliber of the projectile you are using now. That is to say, if you want to experiment, use your current projectile. Yes, I don't have that condition to cast projectiles for you. After a pause, Shi Xiong pointed to the round hole and said, now you have to find a way to make threads on this, otherwise the sealing effect will not be as required. As for how to make threads on this barrel, then you have to figure out a solution yourself. Boss, the steel for this barrel is so hard, how can I get the thread? Lieutenant Ferguson was a little anxious. It's none of my business. You are the main force in the development of new guns. If I want to do everything, why do you need to do it? Well, since you're the boss, I can give it to you. A small tip, it's not complicated to make a steel that is harder than the barrel steel. Aren't we still left with a large pile of steel? You can take off one of them and create the thread you need. The tool. Of course, you must burn a steel red when you build the tool. So remember one thing, if the tool is built but still in a red-hot state, you can quench it with cold water way to make the tool harder. Quenching? Lieutenant Ferguson's eyes suddenly lit up. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 96. Stand by. Ishikama does not know much about the heat treatment process of steel, but he has heard of the 4 fires of the heat treatment process of steel. Annealing, normalizing, quenching and tempering are the 4 fires in the heat treatment process of steel. Just like when the barrel was built yesterday, when the molten steel was poured into the mold, the natural cooling was normalizing. The effect is similar to annealing. Anyway, it is a natural cooling method. Quenching is the rapid cooling of the workpiece by immersing it in cold water or cold oil at a high temperature. Quenching will make the steel, making the workpiece hard and brittle, much harder than the steel under natural cooling. Of course, quenching will make the steel brittle, so it is best to perform tempering again. It is to heat the quenched workpiece to about 700 degrees again for a long period of heat preservation, and then cool it naturally. The hardness of the workpiece obtained in this way is increased, but the toughness will also increase a lot. Ishikama knows a little bit about the general theory of heat treatment just now, but he really doesn't know how to perform heat treatment. Even if it is the most common quenching process, he has seen it from movies or TV, and he has never personally operated it himself. As for the hardness of the tools made by Lieutenant Ferguson, Ishikama is not worried about this, because the hardness of the hardened workpiece is much greater than that of the original steel. If this tool is too fragile, give him a temper at that time, and let this guy figure it out for himself. But looking at the look of Lieutenant Ferguson, he obviously knew what quenching was all about. Of course, it's far from enough to know what the quenching process is. Especially the barrel that was built yesterday is far from enough for Lieutenant Ferguson to experiment. So, as long as this guy is interested in the new gun, he will definitely learn more knowledge to serve his new gun. For example, how to make steel, how to make molds, how to make gun barrels. These things are complementary to each other. If there are few of them, new guns cannot be produced. Only if Lieutenant Ferguson is interested in more and more things, can he stay in the Gaoshu tribe for a while. Ishikama has never thought of keeping Lieutenant Ferguson by his side forever, and Ishikama can't do that even if he asks himself. Patrick Ferguson, who I learned from the history books, was a soldier who was very loyal to the British Empire. If the British Empire is okay, Lieutenant Ferguson may stay in the Gaoshu tribe for a while, even if he is kept until the start of the independent war. Shi Xiong is confident that he has this certainty. But once the War of Independence starts, as a loyal British officer, no matter how good the conditions are, I am afraid that Lieutenant Ferguson will not be able to retain Lieutenant Ferguson. He will definitely leave everything here without hesitation and walk towards the battlefield with a gun. Even if he is facing death, he will still not stop. In this regard, Shi Xiong had already thought of this when he left Lieutenant Ferguson at the beginning. However, between now and the outbreak of the War of Independence, there are still 11 years, and nothing major happened in Britain during this time. Therefore, if Lieutenant Ferguson can stay here to develop new weapons for himself, then the weapon system of the Gaoshu tribe will inevitably make a qualitative leap. Even if Lieutenant Ferguson returns to the British Army and brings these new technologies to the UK, the Gaoshu tribe will still take the lead. And Shi Xiong did not intend to let Ensign Ferguson work alone. Whether it is a rabbit mouth or a hard bone, he has shown a strong interest in firearms. By then, the 2 little guys will be completely arranged by Ensign Ferguson's side, and they will learn while working as assistants. Lieutenant Ferguson has something about firearms. Shi Xiong doesn't believe in the cleverness of the bunny mouth and hard bones. They can't hollow out Ensign Ferguson in 10 years. So from this day on, the bunny mouth and hard bones became the 2 tails beside Lieutenant Ferguson. For these 2 little guys, Lieutenant Ferguson also liked it. After all, the unique simplicity of the Indians was enough to make Lieutenant Ferguson feel different care. Even Ferguson often teaches bunny mouths and hard bones to speak English, and Shi Xiong is a little surprised by the talents shown by these 2 guys in language. For Ferguson to build barrels to experiment with different guns, a lot of steel must be needed. For this reason, Shi Xiong even did not hesitate to mobilize the whole clan once again to excavate iron ore, limestone and coal. The excavation operation benefited from the large-scale use of iron tools and the use of horse-drawn carriages. In just a few days, more than 200 people dug up a large amount of iron ore, limestone and coal. Ishikama is also preparing to start coking alone. The last time coking had to take care of the firing of refractory bricks, Shi Xiong used the simplest way to make coking, but the coking effect was not ideal. In order to increase the success rate of coking as much as possible this time, Shi Xiong decided to adopt the earth kiln coking method. This earth kiln coking is the coking method that Shi Xiong wanted to use but did not use last time. The yield of coking in earth kilns is much higher than that of the big pit coking method used by Shi Xiong last time. Get more coke in one go. As usual, the whole clan is mobilized. www.wuxiaspa.com. Under the current situation, Shi Xiong doesn't even need to speak with Lei. He only needs to say I want to open the furnace for steel making again, then almost all the people who can move the clansmen will come to help. Although the quality of the steel produced from the last time the furnace was opened was substandard, 90% of the steel was produced into pig iron, and the quantity was only about 3 tons, but this still made the whole people happy for a long time. In the past, the clansmen of the clan who wanted to use iron tools had to exchange their precious fur with Vasaku's trading team, but now under the command of the Guardian, they can make steel by themselves. Who doesn't want the Guardian? How many times do the adults open the furnace to make more steel? Anyway, iron ore, limestone, and coal do not cost money. You only need to spend some effort to make steel out of these things. Who wouldn't want to do it? The tribesmen in the tribe are not fools. After refining steel, making salt, and using new farm tools, they have fully understood the hard work of Lord Guardian. He is sincere for the good of the tribe. Therefore, it is not an exaggeration to say that even if Lei stepped up and ordered the clansmen not to obey Shi Xiong's orders, it is estimated that at least 9 of the 10 clansmen would not obey Lei's orders. It's the little baby who can't understand Lei's command. Had it not been for the Kabaru priest of Hongyan who had not spoken, the tribe would want Stone Bear to replace Lei as the new patriarch. Don't doubt, most of the people think so now. In this kind of thing, whether it is ancient or modern, whether it is Chinese or Western, it is the same. Who can make our life better? We will follow whoever, we will support whoever. P.S. Bow to thank don't use heaven for the reward of 100. Chapter 97, The Blacksmith of the Tribe. Although he has decided to use the earth kiln coking method to make more coke, Shi Xiong did not plan to let the big pit where the first coking was done so wastefully. Anyway, the earth kiln coking method also digs a big pit in the ground, so Shi Xiong decided to reuse the big pit from the previous coking after thinking about it for a while. Of course, this big pit is a bit smaller, so it needs to continue to expand. With tools such as shovel, hoe, and pickaxe, digging the hole can be much easier. In just one day, the diameter of the large hole used for the first coking has been doubled, and the depth is also according to the stone. What the bear said deepened by more than half a meter. Then these excited tribesmen started to build the flue with lump coal in accordance with Shi Xiong's requirements. After the first layer of flue was built, pulverized coal was placed around it, and when it was installed to a certain height, it was leveled and solid, and then the second layer of flue was built. There are so many people and great power. Although the people of the tribe have not built a flue before, under Shi Xiong's guidance, this work is progressing very quickly. So it took only half of the morning the next day, and this kiln coal and the wood used for ignition were all cleaned up. The next step is to ignite. After all the pulverized coal is ignited, the coking will officially begin. Although there was no stacking of flue during the first coking, the coking process is almost the same, so with the experience of the first coking, this second coking is much faster. When a flame with blue smoke came out from the pilot hole was muddied to death by the clansmen who had been prepared for a long time, and then another group of clansmen began to cover the sand and then poured water to cool down. Lieutenant Ferguson watched these people making coking under the command of the boss with relish. Although he didn't know why he wanted to do this kind of thing, He was almost completely devoted to the stone bear now, so he had been watching quietly. It was not until he started to sprinkle water to cool down, he quietly approached Shi Xiong and asked in a low voice, "Boss, this kind of thing can really make steel?" Stone Xiong has given him too many pointers these days, which makes it clear to Lieutenant Ferguson, who usually thinks highly of himself, that this savage and cruel big man is actually a very connotative person, and what he knows is simply so impressive. Looking back, Lieutenant Ferguson had already regarded the stone bear as an idol deep down. At the beginning, he couldn't say the word boss because of his face, but since the rotary valve locking device got the eyebrows, after he called boss from his heart, Lieutenant Ferguson never said it again. There is no conflict with this title. And he thinks that calling this big man the boss really doesn't feel wronged at all. A boss like this is definitely worth following. Don't look at this boss who doesn't laugh at ordinary times, but he does things really unambiguously. Lieutenant Ferguson knew very well that the boss started all the tribesmen who had fallen to start steel making, not for anything else, but to be able to have enough steel to use when experimenting with a new gun. Don't talk about this kind of lip service, but only use practical actions to support his boss. Where to look for it? Shi Xiong glanced at Lieutenant Ferguson next to him, and said in a low voice, "The coke is mainly used for iron smelting after being refined, because the melting temperature of iron ore is higher than that of steel, and the heat generated when ordinary coal is burned. And the temperature is not enough to melt the iron ore, so it is necessary to use coal to produce a fuel that can generate greater heat and higher temperature during combustion, so that the iron ore can be completely melted, thereby smelting molten iron." After a pause, Shi Xiong continued to explain, "Only with molten iron, we can perform further processing when the molten iron is melted, so that real steel can be produced. Well, if the steel-making furnace can be produced this time, you have the right to use 1/3 of the qualified steel." Lieutenant Ferguson was touched again by the last words. This is what the boss looks like. This time the coking was very successful. With the first experience in coking, the success rate of this coking was as high as 90%, and most of the coal was successfully refined into qualified coke. And with the success this time, the success rate will continue to rise when coking is done next time. This time coking, at least 20,000 caddies of coal were put into this enlarged earthen kiln, and finally the qualified coke out of the kiln exceeded 13,000 caddies. This ratio is already close to the pass rate of subsequent coking. There is so much coke, enough to open that earthen blast furnace 4 times. Of course, the stone bear next to the earth kiln did not let it sit idle during the coking process. Anyway, no matter how coking is made, a large amount of waste heat will be generated. It is a crime not to use this waste heat. So before coking, Shi Xiong asked the people to prepare a lot of refractory bricks and some ordinary red bricks. As a result, after the end of the coking process, there were many more qualified refractory bricks and ordinary red bricks in the tribe. There are not many red bricks, only a few hundred, but this time the red brick was successfully fired, which is an improvement. For the primitive tribe of Gaoshu tribe, which is almost nothing, even if it is a red brick, it is also a kind of precious wealth. And in order for the tribe to develop and grow, a little bit of accumulation is an indispensable process. These hundreds of red bricks are not many, but they can let the people understand the benefits of red bricks. Whether it is building a house or for other purposes, www.wuxiaspot.com, red bricks are much more convenient than those rocks. The existence of these red bricks is to make the people realize that the red bricks made by firing have a wide range of uses. In the future, if the tribesmen are mobilized to build brick kilns and burn bricks, the tribesmen will spontaneously stand up and contribute. While making coking, several strong men selected from the tribe are not idle. They are all people who are more interested in ironware or smelting, and they are gathered by the wood planer. Musha has shown his talent in smelting, and he himself is willing to switch to smelting. Although this made Lao Muo a little unhappy, Lao Muo finally nodded and agreed to his second son's request for a career change. Therefore, Mu Zhao became the manager of the tribe who was specifically responsible for smelting. With his efforts, some tribesmen interested in smelting also joined his team. Now, these 7 or 8 strong clansmen are learning to strike iron under the arrangement of wooden planes. That's right, after Shi Xiong's guidance, Musha decided to train these tribesmen to become specialized blacksmiths in the tribe. Since you want to train a blacksmith, ironing is one of the basic skills that a blacksmith must master. Well, if Mr. Kobe Bryant can get here from that time and space, this Black Mamba will definitely become the leader of the tribal blacksmith. Now these future blacksmiths, under the command of the wood planer, remelt some scrap pig iron from the last furnace in a crucible, then stir it vigorously, and finally take it out with tongs and place it on the iron felt and continuously forge it with a hammer. Finally, the red iron ore was forged into thin iron plates. In this process, these thin iron plates will eventually become low-carbon steel with very low carbon content or even wrought iron. These iron plates are prepared for the second steel-making process. Chapter 98, Steel-making in the Snow. The North American continent has no large east-west mountain ranges. All the large mountain ranges on the entire continent are almost north-south. Therefore, the cold air mass originating from the northernmost part of the North American continent will go south very smoothly, and because there are no mountains in the middle barrier, the cold air will even reach the Gulf of Mexico. Therefore, even if the Great Smoky Mountain is located in the southeastern part of the North American continent, a sudden cold wave still makes the snow floating here. The stone bear lived in the hilly area in the hinterland of the North China Plain in the previous life, with the Yellow River to the north and the head of the famous 5 sacred mountains to the south. It is said that at this latitude, there will be heavy snow every winter, but with the continuous warming of the global climate, there are only a handful of times when the entire North China Plain snows every year. In some years or even a winter, there is no snow. But after Shi Xiong came to the Gaoshu tribe in 1764, he saw the biggest snow in his life. Ishikama has never seen such a large snowflake in his previous life and this life combined. It is no longer enough to describe this kind of snowflake as a heavy snowfall. This kind of snowflakes comparable to the size of a child's palm is simply a snow film. The whistling north wind mixed with countless heavy snowflakes falling from the sky. It was just a short meal, and there were no other colors except white in the whole world. More than 40 buffaloes captured and domesticated in the tribe are also honestly staying in the cowshed. Thanks to the widespread use of the nose ring, the taming of the buffalo has become easier and easier. It's not that the bison is untamable, on the contrary, the bison is actually very tameable. The reason why the North American Indians tamed bisons was not heard in the original historical time and space, that is because these North American Indians did not have the need to tame bisons. Before Europeans came to the North American continent, the vast majority of North American Indians did not engage in farming, and a few Indian tribes engaged in farming only adopted the roughest farming methods, and they did not have iron farming tools, so they did not need large livestock necessary. Therefore, before the Europeans entered the American continent, there was really no one in North America to tame the bison, because there was no need. And when the Europeans arrived on the North American continent, they brought tamed cattle breeds, and these cattle spread wildly on the North American continent, with tamed cows that can be raised, who still has nothing to do with catching bison and then domesticating it. Therefore, the North American bison has become a completely sad species, and it was almost extinct by those European colonists. But now, the high tree tribes who are preparing to dig deep holes to accumulate food have a high demand for large-scale livestock, and as more and more bison are domesticated, the people of the tribe are also aware of what the Guardian said: it's far safer to raise bison and then slaughter and eat meat than to go out and kill bison by yourself. This statement is correct. Although the tribe has not been willing to slaughter a tamed bison, no one is a fool. Everyone can see that as more and more bison are tamed, there will inevitably be extra bison slaughtered to eat meat. Slaughtering tamed bison is far safer than going out to hunt bison in the wilderness. Although it's dangerous to catch bison, who cares about it at this time? More than 40 tamed bison staying in the cowshed is quite spectacular. It's just that these tamed bull demon kings have completely lost their previous arrogance and fierceness at this time. Although staying in the bullpen is quite awkward, it is better than not finding any grass after a heavy snowfall. At least the two-legged monsters here have prepared a lot of weeds, even if the snow is heavy. It also didn't affect the feasting of these bull demon kings. The stone bear, who was shaken by the heavy snow as soon as he went out, was as excited as a child, gesticulating the gesture of playing the guitar in his hand, holding the microphone for a while, shaking his body, grinning, and howling. He sang the song "Let Me Sprinkle Some Wild on the Snow," and then under the eyes of a group of clansmen, he waved his hand and said loudly, "Go, let's open the furnace and make steel together." No amount of snow can resist the enthusiasm of the people of the tribe. So the earth blast furnace standing in the open space in the center of the tribe ignited a raging fire again. The soaring heat even prevented snow from falling in the area tens of meters above the blast furnace, and the palm-sized snowflakes could not resist the heat ejected from the earth blast furnace. Although there were sheds on the top of the square pond where the molten iron was held, in fact, even without those sheds, the heat emitted by the molten iron was enough to keep the snow from falling. In such a severe cold weather, the tribesmen who are responsible for stirring the molten iron are even shirtless at work. It's so hot next to Fang Tang. In order to increase the contact surface between molten iron and oxygen, Shi Xiong commanded the tribe to build another square pond before the furnace was opened for the second time. With 2 square ponds containing molten iron, the depth of molten iron is reduced by half, making it easier to stir. This time, Shi Xiong must let the tribes fully stir all the molten iron that flows out www.wuxiaspot.com so that the molten iron can be decarbonized more thoroughly. Of course, the thin iron plates made by the blacksmiths were tied with some pig iron sheets early, and then they were put into the Fang Tang to act as a decarbonizing agent. This steel making, Shi Xiong will operate according to the real steel filling method. The yellow and white molten iron was stirred by many tribesmen in the 2 square ponds. Although it was difficult to stir the viscous molten iron, it could not hold up the enthusiasm of the tribesmen. These extremely heavy molten irons were even almost stirred in front of the tribesmen who worked on relay. The waves are coming, and the wrought iron plates that have been put in the Fang Tang have already melted. The melting point of wrought iron itself is much lower than that of pig iron. Once the wrought iron melts, it will inevitably further reduce the carbon content in the molten iron. Mushi took the 2 clans to nervously record the weight and proportion of all the materials added in this steel-making furnace. These data have extremely important value for the next steel-making. If the steel-making is successful this time, then the next steel-making can be put in materials according to this ratio. If it is unsuccessful, then make improvements on the basis of these data, and sooner or later, qualified steel can be produced. Although the temperature of the molten iron flowing out of the blast furnace is extremely high, it cannot withstand the law of natural cooling. Therefore, when the molten iron was almost stirred, the wooden planer gave an order, and the clansman who had prepared a large iron spoon or a kaolin-fired earthen spoon took a spoonful of the viscous molten iron until it was already warmed in the mold. At this step, the faces of every tribe are cheerful, because they all know that at this step, no matter what the quality of the steel produced, a large number of iron tools will be added to the tribe. P.S. Bo to thank Longsheng Yongxia 100 for the reward. Chapter 99. Manual wooden broaching machine. Shi Xiong's carefully reformed smelting process really played a huge role, because after this furnace of molten iron was fully oxidized and decarbonized, the steel that came out of it was pure steel, and according to Shi Xiong's general judgment, this patch of steel should belong to the scope of low-carbon steel. Although low and medium carbon steel is not as hard as high carbon steel, it has better toughness. In daily life and military applications, low and medium carbon steel is far more versatile than high carbon steel. And low and medium carbon steel can also be processed by heat treatment. The surface hardness of the processed workpiece is very high, and it can even be used as high carbon steel. Although Shi Xiong did not know the heat treatment process very well, he had heard of it in general, So he told Lieutenant Ferguson what annealing is, what is tempering, and what is quenching. After these heat treatment processes, he asked this the little brother went to the experiment by himself. Anyway, the amount of steel produced in this furnace is large enough to be enough for Lieutenant Ferguson. But Major Ferguson is obviously not thinking about the steel that has just been tempered. He is now making rifled wooden lathes with the Wood family. That's right, the first meaningful thing that Lieutenant Ferguson did after coming to the High Tree tribe was to make a wooden lathe with Mew and his family specifically for rifling the barrel of the gun. This is an extremely backward lathe in Shi Xiong's eyes, and the power is neither water nor steam, let alone electricity, not even the most basic animal power, but pure human power. But this is indeed a lathe, even if it is very crude, even if the power used is primitive, but this is still an out-and-out machine tool, because the use of this simple equipment can complete the work of rifling the barrel. This lathe is very long, more than 3 meters long. It is actually a wooden shelf on which 2 very flat and straight wooden rails are laid. A wooden sliding table that can fix the hook knife is erected on the rails, and on the 2 rails between is the fixed position of the barrel. This weird-shaped lathe is called manual wooden broaching machine, and there are 3 core parts of this broaching machine. One is a hook knife specially used for rifling, and the other is a tie rod connecting the sliding table and the hook knife, the screw. The other is the most complicated linkage mechanism, which involves the core part of the barrel that rotates at a constant speed. The hook knife is the core part specially used to pull the rifling. Said it was a knife, but Shi Xiong couldn't bear to look directly at it because of its crudeness. This kind of hook knife is actually a steel rod slightly smaller than the inner diameter of the barrel. This steel rod is also cast, and there is a groove in a specific part. This groove is used to hold the steel sheet that has become stronger after quenching. The steel sheet is made by hand, and there are 1 or 2 protruding bands with a certain angle of inclination on it. Because it is made by hand and uses a quenching process, the surface hardness of the steel sheet is much higher than the hardness of the barrel. In this era when there is no high-hardness alloy steel, this method can only be used to replace high-hardness alloy steel. This combination is a hook knife. Another core part of the broaching machine is the tie rod screw connecting the hook knife and the sliding platform. The history of screws is very long, dating back to about 400 BC. However, modern screws appeared in the middle and late 19th century, so in this era, screws are still extremely precious and extremely difficult to build. These screws are all made by hand. When making, first forge the nail blank of the screw, and then use a hammer to knock out the nail head and round nail body on the nail blank, then, use a saw to cut a groove on the nail head, and then use a kind of die screw steel plate manufacturing thread. The manufacturing process of this kind of screw is complicated and expensive, so the early screws are sold individually, and ordinary people can't master the process of screw processing. However, Ferguson happened to have mastered this technique, so under his leadership, the 7 or 8 blacksmiths worked hard for a whole day to create 4 tie rod screws more than 1 meter long and more than 10 hook knives, the kind of hardened steel sheet. Ishikama didn't know how to pull the rifling. He only knew that the rifling of the barrels of later generations was pulled out with special equipment. How could he have seen manual rifling equipment in the middle of the 18th century? So this time Lieutenant Ferguson let Shi Xiong open his eyes. The hook knife and tie rod screws are fixed, and then you can start rifling. Although the diameter of the steel rod on which the hook knife is installed is slightly smaller than the diameter of the barrel, if the steel plate is added, the diameter of the hook knife is slightly larger than the barrel. So pulling the hook knife is a matter of great effort, because the hook knife is almost pulled from one end of the barrel to the other in a hard squeeze manner. The hardness of the steel sheet is greater than the hardness of the barrel. So whenever the hook knife is pulled from one end of the barrel to the other end, the hook knife will pull a groove from the inner wall of the barrel. Of course, under the fixed barrel, there is a linkage mechanism that is complicated in this era, and it is also another core part of this lathe. The function of this mechanism is to adjust the barrel rotation speed according to the length of the pulling distance. Yes, although the barrel is fixed in the middle of the 2 rails, it just can't move back and forth. but it can be turned. When the worker pulls the hook knife, as the wooden sliding table moves, it will drive a tough leather belt hung on the sliding table, and the leather belt passes through a wooden pulley at the other end of the broaching machine and a small wooden wheel at the bottom of the broaching machine, connected. When the sliding table moves, pull the leather belt, and the leather belt drives the wooden wheel to rotate, and another small wooden wheel that is coaxial with the small wooden wheel will also rotate. This small wooden wheel also has a leather belt connected to another large wooden wheel. This large wooden wheel also has a coaxial small wooden wheel. The small wooden wheel will also have a belt and another a larger wooden wheel connection. This is actually a very simple three-stage belt drive reduction device. When the sliding table is pulled, the movement of the belt pulls the rotation of the three sets of coaxial wooden wheels under the broaching machine. Because of the three-stage deceleration, the largest wooden wheel turns the slowest. In addition, the coaxial wooden wheel of the last group of wooden wheels is connected to the fixed barrel. So once the sliding table is pulled, the barrel will rotate at a very slow speed at a uniform speed. In this way, as the barrel rotates at a constant speed, every time the hook knife is pulled, a tangled rifle can be pulled out. When one rifle reaches a predetermined width, change the position to pull the second rifle. This kind of manual wooden broaching machine was the most important tool for rifling, often used by early American colonists. Even after the emergence of steam machinery, this kind of manual broaching machine was still used in a small area. However, although the rifled gun of this era is not as good as pulling a rifling hundreds of times in later generations, if you want to pull a qualified rifling, you must at least broach about 20 times. So, this is a very laborious job. Chapter 100, Laborious. Manual rifling is indeed a very laborious task. The quality of this manual wooden broaching machine made by Ferguson and Wood's family is still very good. At the very least, when the slider is pulled, the transmission parts are running steadily, and the rotation of the barrel is extremely stable, which is enough to explain the quality of this broaching machine is excellent. This is a wooden broaching machine, not a real steel lathe of later generations. Generally speaking, this kind of thing made of wood will vibrate or even shift when it is running. However, this broaching machine does not have such a situation, or it does, but it is very slight, and it is invisible to the naked eye. It's no wonder that in order to maintain the stability of this broaching machine, the 8 wooden feet of the broaching machine are all buried in the ground. But even with such a stable broaching machine, it takes a lot of effort to pull the rifling. A young baby like a rabbit's mouth and a hard bone has already weakened his arms by pulling the slider twice in a row. This thing is completely relying on the strength of the human body, forcibly pulling a hook knife to cut a layer of steel from the inner wall of the barrel, and it also drives a 3-stage reduction gear, which can't be pulled without enough strength. Sliders on the broaching machine. Like several adult men who Ferguson asked for help, after pulling the slider 4 or 5 times in a row, they also grinned and said they needed a rest. Shi Xiong also tried to pull it a few times, and sure enough, this job is not something ordinary people can do. Even with Shi Xiong's strength, he felt that his arms began to sore after pulling it 20 times. Fortunately, for the first time, the rifling did not require any time. So the 5 or 6 men surrounding the broaching machine took a full afternoon to pull the barrel out of the 4 rifling. Rifling is divided into 2 types of yin and yang rifling. The yang rifle is convex, and the yin rifle is concave. And the yang rifle is produced in the process of pulling the yin rifle. So, even if only 4 male rifles are pulled out, it is actually equivalent to cutting down the inner wall of the entire barrel by about 0.15 millimeters. Although it is very laborious, although it is a wooden broaching machine, it can process the rifling with an accuracy of 0.15 millimeters. This life can only be described by the word beautiful in this era. At the very least, Lieutenant Ferguson was satisfied with the rifling. You must know that in this era, let alone the accuracy of 1/10 of a millimeter, even if it is doubled, it is still very good. Thanks to the craftsmanship of the old Wood family, the quality of this broaching machine is really good. Boss, The rifling of this barrel is very good. It can be said to be the most beautiful rifling I have ever seen, Lieutenant Ferguson said excitedly while holding the barrel. Shi Xiong nodded. Yes, the rifling of this barrel is really good, but the efficiency of this lathe is too low. We 5 or 6 people worked hard all afternoon to come up with such a barrel. How many people do you need to make gun barrels on a large scale? This remark made the old wood on the side a little ashamed, and Lieutenant Ferguson also opened his mouth and didn't say anything to refute it. So, I think this broaching machine needs to be improved, at least not so hard, Shi Xiong said unceremoniously. Although he has not been with Stone Bear for long, Ferguson is indeed a very smart person. He has already figured out some of the temperaments of this boss who looks scary on the outside but is actually very delicate on the inside. So, when Ferguson heard Shi Xiong say this, his eyes lit up and asked, "Boss, do you have any idea?" Shi Xiong looked at Ferguson with a look of excitement, and nodded slightly. Don't think that Shi Xiong was an out-and-out otaku in his previous life, but he also has many hobbies, such as reading books and consulting materials. In addition, Shi Xiong is still a semi-military fan. When he checked some firearms information in his previous life, he once watched a video. The content recorded in the video was based on the principle of rifling. Rifling is not a thing to look down upon, but it is the soul of a gun. Shi Xiong is also very curious about how the rifling is pulled out, so I have watched this video. The principle of rifling introduced in the video is almost the same as Ferguson and others rifling just now, but they have more advanced equipment. After all, they are modern lathes. However, Shi Xiong was also inspired by that video, especially when I saw the deceleration device at the bottom of the broaching machine. I didn't know how to do it. This inspiration came just like a diabetes collapse. This broaching machine is still very good, but the only disadvantage is that it consumes too much energy, and the force is lost too much in the transmission process. So we should focus on these two aspects of improvement. Shi Xiong pointed to that. The slider refers to the deceleration device at the bottom of the broaching machine. Wood, since you can make this type of deceleration a device that is conveyed by a belt, then I believe you should be able to make a more labor-saving power device. Shi Xiong pointed to the slider and said, for example, can we change one? The idea is that we don't use a slider as the source of power www.wuxiaspot.com but replace it with a fixed device. This sentence made several people feel a little bit trapped. Shi Xiong shook his head and pointed to the position of the slider and said, if you can make a uniform round wheel as a deceleration device from old wood, can you build a deceleration device at this position? Well, a small wheel can be placed here, and then install a big wheel here, and connect the two with a belt. Then when we turn the small wheel, the big wheel can rotate with the belt. Old wood nodded thoughtfully. Master Guardian, this device is not difficult to build. But, the wheel is spinning. How do you drive the hook knife? This is not easy. You install a steel bar perpendicular to the big wheel on the big wheel, and then change the tie rod screw to have eyelets at both ends. Then one end of the tie rod screw can fit into the steel bar on the big wheel, and the place where the other end is connected to the hook knife is slightly improved. Instead of allowing the pull rod to be directly connected to the hook knife, a connection fixing device is made behind the hook knife. The hook knife is connected to this device, and the pull rod is connected to this device, connected to the other side. Shi Xiong gestured with both hands. The eyes on both ends of the tie rod are attached to their respective connecting parts, so they can move freely. Then when we turn the small wheel on, the big wheel rotates. The tie rod screw can complete a forward and backward advancement actions. If we set the diameter of the big wheel to be the same as the length of the barrel, then every time the big wheel turns a circle, then we can push the rod screw with the hook knife to make a complete reciprocating motion in the barrel. Along with Shi Xiong's explanation and gestures, both Old Wood and Ferguson's eyes lit up. P.S. Bowen, thank you for the reward of morning Wuhuaxia 300. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.